Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, the quiet corner where curiosity slows down, science unfolds gently, and the past feels close enough to touch. Tonight, we're going to step into a world that is at once familiar and deeply strange, a world that existed not so very long ago in the grand timeline of Earth, yet feels almost impossible to imagine from the safety of modern life. It is a world where the night was darker than we are used to, where silence carried meaning, and where every rustle in the grass mattered. Because there was a time, not millions of years before dinosaurs or in some distant alien landscape, but in the recent story of our own species, when humans were not the hunters at the top of the food chain. We were prey, not occasionally, not rarely, but regularly, consistently, and often enough that it shaped who we became. And before we wander any further into that ancient and uneasy world, let me ask you something gentle to begin with. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you in a quiet room, the lights low, the day already behind you? Perhaps the faint glow of a screen is the brightest thing nearby. Maybe you can hear distant traffic, or the soft ticking of a clock, or nothing at all but your own breathing. And what time is it there, right now, in your small corner of the turning Earth? It's a fitting question, because the story we're about to explore is not only about survival and danger, but about time itself, about how not so long ago the rules of daily life were completely different, and how the echoes of that time still live quietly inside us in ways most of us never notice. If you find this journey soothing or interesting or simply a pleasant way to unwind at the end of a long day, I'd be grateful if you gave the video a like and perhaps subscribed. It helps this calm little space reach others who might need a moment of quiet curiosity too. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your thoughts slow just a little, because we're going to travel far back, not to a world of knights or pyramids or even the first cities, but to a time when the most important skill a human could have was not building, or farming, or writing. It was staying alive until morning. It's easy to forget from the perspective of the modern world just how unusual our present situation really is. Today, most humans live surrounded by walls, protected by locks, lights, and communities. The night is no longer truly dark. The wilderness is no longer at the doorstep for most of us. The idea that something large and hungry might be waiting just beyond the circle of firelight feels more like a scene from a documentary than a memory written into our bones. But for the vast majority of human history, safety was never guaranteed. Early humans were not particularly fast runners compared to many animals. We had no claws, no sharp teeth, no thick hides or armoured plates. Our sense of smell was modest, our hearing unremarkable, and our bodies, though capable and resilient in many ways, were not built for short bursts of explosive speed or brute strength. In many respects, an early human standing alone on an open plain would have been one of the more vulnerable creatures in sight, and the world they lived in was full of predators. Lions larger than those we know today, packs of hyenas that could crush bone with ease, saber-toothed cats with jaws built not for speed, but for devastating precision, giant birds of prey, crocodiles in the rivers, wolves that hunted in coordinated groups, patient and tireless. To these animals, a lone human was not a ruler of the land. A lone human was an opportunity. Imagine for a moment stepping outside at night into a landscape without electric lights, without the distant glow of cities, without the reassuring hum of modern life. The darkness would feel heavier, more complete. Your eyes would strain to make sense of shapes that shifted and moved at the edges of vision. And more importantly, you would know, not as a distant possibility but as a practical reality, that something out there might be watching you. That knowledge changes how you walk, how you listen, how you breathe. Early humans lived with that awareness every day. Morning brought relief, but not safety. Predators hunted in daylight too. The open grasslands offered little cover, and even forests, though sheltering, carried their own dangers. Every journey for water, every search for food, Every movement across the land required attention. To survive, our ancestors had to become observers. They learned to read tracks in the dirt, to notice when birds suddenly went silent, to recognize the difference between the wind-moving grass and something heavier pushing through it. These skills were not hobbies or interesting bits of knowledge. They were essential, as necessary as breathing. And over time, these habits shape the human mind. Even today, many people feel uneasy in complete silence, or in darkness broken by unfamiliar sounds. A sudden noise can make the heart race before the conscious mind has time to interpret it. That quick surge of alertness, that instant readiness, is not a flaw in our design. It is an inheritance. Because for thousands upon thousands of years, noticing the snap of a twig half a second earlier might have meant the difference between life and death. But early humans were not helpless. Far from it. What they lacked in claws and speed, they began to make up for in something far more powerful, though it took time to develop. Awareness, cooperation, and eventually fire. Yet before those advantages fully changed the balance, there was a long stretch of time when humans occupied a very uncertain place in the food chain. Not the weakest animals certainly, but not yet the dominant ones either. We were clever but still vulnerable, resourceful but still hunted. And perhaps one of the most important changes that allowed humans to survive those years was not physical at all. It was social. Most predators rely on stealth or strength or speed. Humans, even early ones, relied increasingly on each other. A group of watchful individuals could see more than one alone. A circle of people resting together at night was safer than a solitary sleeper. Shared knowledge meant shared survival. Someone who noticed where predators tended to travel could warn others. Someone who discovered a safer place to rest could guide the group there. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the human way of surviving began to shift from individual endurance to collective awareness. And with that shift came something remarkable. The beginnings of trust. Trust that someone else would keep watch while you slept. Trust that warnings would be given. Trust that food would be shared and that danger would be faced together. These quiet agreements, repeated night after night, season after season, form the earliest threads of human society. It's strange, in a way, to think that some of the most familiar parts of modern life, conversation, companionship, the comfort of knowing someone else is nearby, may have roots in those ancient nights when being alone was simply too dangerous. If you've ever felt calmer just because another person was in the room, even without speaking, you felt a small echo of that distant past. But the world itself was not static. Climate shifted, landscapes changed, animals migrated or vanished, and humans, always moving, always adapting, followed the rhythms of a planet that never stood still. During colder periods, survival became even harder. Food grew scarce, predators grew bolder, competition intensified, not just between humans and animals, but between different human groups as well. And yet, against all odds, humans endured. Not because we were the strongest, not because we were the fastest, but because we were persistent. Persistence, it turns out, can be a powerful survival strategy. Humans are capable of travelling long distances at a steady pace, of tracking animals patiently, of waiting, watching and remembering. Predators often rely on bursts of energy. Humans began to rely on endurance, but that transformation did not happen overnight. For a long time, humans were still learning, still adapting, still living in a world where the balance of power was uncertain. And it's worth pausing here to notice something curious. Even though none of us today live under those conditions, traces of that ancient life remain in small, ordinary behaviours. The instinct to glance behind you when walking alone at night, the way unfamiliar noises can pull attention instantly, the comfort of closing a door and knowing it is locked. These habits are not taught in any formal sense. They arise naturally, quietly, as if some part of the mind already understands their importance. Because in a way it does. The human brain is not only a product of cities and screens and modern routines, it is also shaped by countless generations who lived in forests, grasslands and river valleys where awareness was the first line of defence. And as we continue this journey, we're going to explore that world in more detail, the landscapes our ancestors walked through, the animals that hunted them, the strategies they developed to survive, and the long, gradual turning point when humans began, little by little, to shift from being hunted to becoming hunters themselves. But before that turning point came a long era of uncertainty, an age when every sunset carried a question. Would the night pass quietly, or would something be waiting in the dark? So let your mind wander there gently now, to a wide, ancient landscape under a fading sky, where small groups of humans gather close together, listening, watching, and preparing for the long hours ahead, in a world where danger was not rare or distant, but part of the ordinary rhythm of life, and where the story of human survival was only just beginning to unfold in a land ruled not by people, but by teeth, claws, and patience. Long before cities, long before farms, and even long before the first permanent villages appeared, the world our ancestors walked through was far less forgiving than the one we know today. It was not simply quieter or emptier. It was larger in a way that is difficult to picture now, filled with animals that were not only bigger than most modern creatures, but also more numerous, more widespread, and often far more dangerous. To understand what it meant for humans to live as prey, it helps to imagine the landscape itself, because danger was not limited to a single place or a single predator. It was everywhere, woven into the land, the water, and even the air. If you were standing on an open plain tens of thousands of years ago, the horizon might have looked peaceful at first glance. Grass swaying in the wind, distant hills fading into haze, perhaps herds of grazing animals scattered across the distance, but that calm surface hid a constant tension. Grazing animals were always alert, their heads lifting suddenly, ears turning, bodies stiffening at sounds too faint for human ears to notice. They were listening for hunters, and so were the humans, because the same predators stalking antelope, horses, or young mammoths would not hesitate to attack a human if the opportunity arose. One of the most formidable predators of that era was the saber-toothed cat, known scientifically as Smilodon. Despite its name, it was not exactly like modern lions or tigers. It was heavier, more powerfully built in the forelimbs, designed not for long chases but for ambush. Its enormous canine teeth, sometimes longer than a human finger, were used to deliver precise, devastating bites. A group of early humans travelling through dense vegetation would have had little warning if such a predator lay in wait. A sudden rush, a blur of muscle and fur, and the attack would be over in seconds. Speed was rarely the deciding factor. Surprise was. Lions, too, were larger and more widely distributed in the past. There were cave lions in Europe and Asia, some of the largest cats ever to exist. They hunted in groups, coordinated, patient, and capable of bringing down animals far larger than themselves. A human, especially one separated from companions, would have been a relatively easy target. It's easy to imagine these predators as rare or distant, but in many regions they were common enough that avoiding them was part of daily life. Tracks in the mud, claw marks on trees, the distant echo of a roar carried by wind, these were not curiosities, they were warnings, and cats were only part of the story. Hyenas, often underestimated today, were among the most formidable hunters and scavengers of the ancient world. Some prehistoric species were larger than modern ones, with jaws powerful enough to crush thick bones and teeth, adapted for consuming nearly every part of a carcass. They hunted in clans, coordinated and relentless, capable of chasing prey over long distances. A group of humans might defend themselves with sticks, stones and numbers, but a large clan of hyenas could be bold, testing the edges of a camp, circling, waiting for weakness. The night in particular belonged to them. Darkness was not merely an absence of light, it was a shift in power. Humans, without fire or shelter, were at a severe disadvantage after sunset. Predators with keen night vision and silent movement gained the upper hand. Sounds carried farther in the cool air. The crack of a branch or the distant cough of a big cat could travel long distances, and every unfamiliar noise demanded attention. Sleeping deeply in such a world was difficult. Someone always had to remain awake, listening, watching the darkness beyond the faint glow of embers. And the dangers were not limited to land. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands, which provided water and attracted animals, were also home to crocodiles and other large reptiles. These ambush predators could remain almost completely still, eyes and nostrils barely visible above the surface, waiting patiently for something to come close to drink. A moment of carelessness at the water's edge could be fatal. Even crossing a river carried risk. Strong currents, hidden drop-offs, and unseen animals beneath the surface turned a simple necessity into a gamble. In some regions, there were predators that no longer exist today. Giant bears, for example, roamed parts of North America and Eurasia. The short-faced bear, one of the largest land carnivores ever, could stand over 3 meters tall when upright. It may not have hunted humans regularly, but encountering such an animal at close range would have been terrifying beyond description. Wolves, too, were formidable, often larger than modern populations, travelling in packs that could cover vast distances. They were intelligent, social, and highly adaptable, traits that in some ways mirrored early humans themselves. This was a world of competition, not just between predators and prey, but between predators themselves. Carcasses were contested, territory mattered. Every large carnivore had to fight, steal, or defend to survive, and humans existed within that web, not at the top, not entirely at the bottom, but in a precarious middle ground, strong enough to survive in groups, clever enough to adapt, yet still vulnerable. What made this situation even more challenging was that humans were not always the primary target of predators. Often, attacks happened because of opportunity. A child straying too far, an injured individual lagging behind, someone moving alone at dusk. Predators are efficient. They do not take unnecessary risks. They choose the easiest meal available. That simple fact shaped human behaviour in profound ways. Groups stayed close together. Camps were chosen carefully, often near natural barriers like cliffs or dense vegetation that limited the directions from which predators could approach. Fires were tended not only for warmth and cooking, but for protection. Many predators are cautious of fire, and even a small blaze could create a zone of relative safety. But fire was not always available. There were long periods in human history before fire was controlled reliably, and even afterward, keeping it alive required effort and attention. Rain could extinguish it. Strong winds could scatter embers. Fuel had to be gathered, often from some distance away. Without fire, the night regained its full power. It's difficult to truly imagine a darkness without artificial light. Today, even in rural areas, there's often a faint glow on the horizon. In cities, the night sky is rarely fully dark at all, but in the ancient world, moonless nights were nearly absolute in their darkness. The stars were brilliant, but they did little to illuminate the ground. Movement slowed. Conversations softened. Every sense strained for clues. And in those hours, the imagination could be as powerful as any predator. Sounds seemed closer than they were. Shapes seemed to move when they had not. The mind, primed for danger, filled in gaps with possibilities. Yet this constant awareness had an unexpected effect over many generations. It sharpened perception. Humans became exceptionally good at noticing subtle changes in their surroundings. A bird taking flight suddenly, the silence of insects, the faint scent carried by wind. These details, easy to overlook in modern life, were once essential signals. The landscape itself became a language, and those who could read it well were more likely to survive. Seasons added another layer of difficulty. During colder periods, food became scarce, and predators grew more desperate. Herds migrated, sometimes leaving large areas nearly empty of prey. Humans following those herds travelled long distances, often through unfamiliar territory where new predators and new dangers awaited. Storms, too, could be deadly. Exposure to cold or heat, lack of shelter, and the constant need to find food and water meant that survival depended not only on avoiding predators, but on enduring the environment itself. In many ways, the environment was the largest predator of all. And yet, despite all of this, humans did not merely endure. They adapted. One of the most important adaptations was learning where predators preferred to hunt and where they did not. Open areas with clear sight lines could be safer during the day. Elevated ground offered visibility. Narrow passages or dense thickets, though sometimes useful for hiding, could also become traps. Knowledge of the land became a kind of invisible armour. This knowledge was shared, taught, passed from one generation to the next. Children learned by watching, listening, and imitating. Stories, gestures, and demonstrations carried information long before written language existed. In this way, survival skills became part of culture itself. Another crucial factor was cooperation. A single human was vulnerable. A group was far less so. Predators often hesitate to attack groups, especially when those groups stand together, make noise, and appear larger than they are. Even simple tools, sticks, stones, sharpened branches could be effective when used by several people at once. Humans may not have had claws, but they had hands capable of gripping, throwing, and shaping objects. These abilities, combined with social bonds and communication, gradually shifted the balance, but that shift took a very long time. For thousands of years, humans and large predators shared the land in a tense coexistence, each adapting to the other. Predators learned that humans could be dangerous when grouped and alert. Humans learned that predators were patient and opportunistic. This long relationship left marks on both sides. Some predators became more cautious around humans, while humans developed an enduring sensitivity to signs of danger. And still, the world remained unpredictable. A sudden encounter could change everything. A hunting party might stumble upon a predator at a carcass. A resting group might hear movement too late. Injuries, even minor ones, could become life-threatening without modern medicine. Every day carried risk. Yet within that risk, life continued. People laughed, shared food, cared for children, and rested when they could. Survival was not only about fear, it was also about resilience, about finding moments of calm even in a dangerous world. Perhaps that balance between vigilance and rest is something we still carry today. The ability to relax in safety while remaining somewhere deep inside, aware of the world beyond the circle of light. And as time passed, small changes began to accumulate. Better tools, more reliable use of fire, stronger social bonds, gradual improvements in hunting techniques. These changes did not transform humans overnight, but they began to tilt the balance ever so slightly in our favour. Still, at this point in the story, humans were far from dominant. The great predators still ruled vast territories. The night still belonged to hunters with sharper senses and stronger bodies. At first glance, if you could travel back far enough to meet a group of early humans, you might be surprised by how ordinary they looked. Not so different from us that you would mistake them for something else, yet not quite like the people you pass on the street today. They were shorter on average, more strongly built in some ways, leaner in others, and shaped by lives that demanded constant movement. Their hands were rough, their feet toughened by uneven ground, their bodies marked by small scars and healed injuries that told quiet stories of survival. But what would stand out most clearly would not be their appearance, it would be their vulnerability. Because compared to many of the animals around them, early humans were not physically impressive in the ways that matter most in the wild. A leopard could sprint faster, a wolf could bite harder, a bear could overpower them with ease. Even many herbivores, animals that did not hunt at all, were stronger and more dangerous in a confrontation. A wild horse could kick with crushing force, A bison could charge with terrifying speed. An elk could gore with antlers sharp as spears. A human, standing alone, had none of these advantages. Our teeth were small and flat compared to those of carnivores. Our nails were blunt. Our skin, though resilient, offered little protection against claws or fangs. We could not outrun most predators in a short chase, nor could we climb as quickly as many tree-dwelling animals. Even our sense of smell, so crucial for many species, was relatively weak. From a purely physical perspective, humans were easy to underestimate, and in many cases, predators did. What allowed early humans to survive was not strength or speed in the conventional sense, but a different set of traits, some obvious, some subtle, and some that only revealed their value over long stretches of time. One of the most important of these was endurance. Humans are not fast sprinters, but we are remarkably capable of sustained movement. Our bodies are built for long-distance travel, for walking hour after hour, for jogging steadily across open ground. Our ability to sweat efficiently allows us to regulate body temperature better than most mammals during prolonged exertion. This may not sound dramatic, but in the natural world, endurance can be as powerful as speed. Some early humans practiced what is known today as persistence hunting, following an animal at a steady pace for hours until it became exhausted and overheated. Few predators can maintain a chase that long. Eventually, the prey slows, stumbles, and can be approached more safely. But this strategy required cooperation, patience, and knowledge of the land. It was not something a single individual could do easily. It depended on the group. And groups were essential in many other ways. Alone, a human was vulnerable. Together, humans could watch in multiple directions, share food, defend each other, and care for the injured or young. This social structure, so familiar to us today, was not just a cultural preference. It was a survival strategy. In fact, one of the defining characteristics of early humans was how much they depended on one another. Many animals, once grown, live largely solitary lives. Humans did not. Children required years of care before they could contribute meaningfully to the group. Injured individuals sometimes survived long enough to heal, suggesting that others helped them, bringing food, offering protection, waiting when necessary. This level of cooperation was unusual in the animal world, and it carried both costs and benefits. The cost was that humans had to find enough food to support not just themselves, but others who could not yet hunt or gather. The benefit was that knowledge accumulated and spread. Skills were taught. Experience was shared. A person who had learned where water could be found in a dry season, or which plants were safe to eat, became valuable in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. Memory became a tool. So did communication. Early human communication was not like modern language, but it was far more complex than simple calls or gestures. Sounds, expressions, body language, and eventually structured speech allowed people to coordinate, warn, and teach. A shouted warning could save lives. A gesture could direct others away from danger. A shared understanding of signals, a raised hand, a certain call, a particular rhythm of tapping could mean the difference between chaos and coordinated response. These abilities did not eliminate vulnerability, but they reduced it. Another feature that shaped early humans was their upright posture. Walking on two legs freed the hands, allowing them to carry tools, food, or children. It also raised the head higher, improving visibility over tall grasses. But bipedalism came with trade-offs. Running on two legs is less stable than running on four. A fall could cause serious injury. The spine and joints bore stresses that quadrupeds distributed more evenly. And while upright walking is efficient over long distances, it does not provide the explosive speed needed to escape sudden attacks. Early humans, in other words, were well suited for endurance and awareness, but not for rapid escape. This made anticipation and caution essential. Another limitation was the human reliance on relatively fragile tools in the earliest periods. Stones shaped into sharp edges could cut and scrape, but they required skill to produce and use effectively. Wooden spears hardened in fire were useful but not infallible. A broken tool could mean going without until another was made, and making tools took time that had to be carved out of days already filled with searching for food, finding water, caring for others, and staying alert to danger. Food itself was often uncertain. Early humans were not primarily hunters at first. Many were scavengers and gatherers, collecting fruits, roots, seeds, insects, and occasionally meat from carcasses left behind by larger predators. This meant competing with other scavengers, vultures, hyenas, smaller carnivores, each ready to claim what they could. Approaching a carcass was risky. The predator that made the kill might still be nearby, resting or watching. Even if it had left, other scavengers could be aggressive. Yet meat, when obtained, was valuable. It provided concentrated energy and nutrients that supported brain development and physical endurance. So humans took the risk. Over time, they became more skilled at judging when it was safe to approach, how to work quickly, and how to carry food back to the group. Carrying food, in fact, was another human trait that shaped survival. Unlike many predators that consume a kill on the spot, humans often transported food to share. This reinforced social bonds and ensured that even those who had not participated in obtaining the food could survive. Sharing was not just generosity, it was insurance. Anyone could be injured or unlucky on a given day. A group that shared food increased everyone's chances over the long term. But sharing also required trust and social rules, the beginnings of norms that governed behaviour within the group. These norms were not written, but they were understood, and then there was the mind itself. Early humans possessed growing cognitive abilities, the capacity to plan, to imagine, to anticipate. These abilities did not make them invincible, but they allowed them to think ahead, to choose campsites carefully, to remember where predators had been seen, to predict seasonal changes. Planning is a quiet kind of strength. It does not roar or charge. It works slowly, shaping decisions before danger even appears. Still, despite all these advantages, early humans lived with constant risk. Injuries were common: a twisted ankle, a deep cut, an infected wound. Any of these could become life-threatening without modern medicine. Illness, too, was a constant threat. Parasites, bacteria, and viruses moved easily through small groups living close together. Life expectancy was shorter, not because everyone died young, but because many did. Those who survived childhood and avoided serious injury could live to respectable ages, but the path was uncertain. Children especially were vulnerable. Protecting them required vigilance, carrying, teaching, and constant attention. The presence of children also shaped how groups moved, how fast they travelled, and where they chose to rest. In many ways, the rhythm of early human life was dictated by the needs of the most vulnerable members, and vulnerability, though often seen as weakness, played an unexpected role in shaping human nature. Because being vulnerable encourages connection, it encourages cooperation, it encourages empathy. A creature that depends on others must learn to understand others, and so, gradually humans became not just survivors, but social beings in the deepest sense, bound together not only by necessity but by shared experience. Even fear, that constant companion in a dangerous world, became something shared. A sudden alarm, a collective stillness, a group reacting together, these moments reinforced bonds. Fear isolated individuals, but it united groups. As generations passed, small improvements accumulated. Tools became more refined. Hunting techniques improved. The controlled use of fire spread more widely. Shelters became more effective. Each change reduced vulnerability a little. But the world remained dangerous and humans remained far from dominant. Predators still watched. Nights were still long. Journeys were still uncertain. And yet, something was changing, slowly and steadily, within the human species itself. Not in muscle or bone, but in behaviour, in awareness, in the ability to learn from one another and pass that learning forward. That quiet transformation would, over many thousands of years, shift the balance of power on Earth in ways no predator could have anticipated. Not all dangers announce themselves with a roar or the sound of pounding footsteps. Very often, the greatest threat in the ancient world was the one that made almost no sound at all, the presence that watched quietly, waited patiently, and moved only when the moment was right. For early humans, the feeling of being watched was not imagination or superstition. It was often correct. Predators survive by remaining unseen until the final moment. Their senses are tuned for it, their bodies shaped for it, their instincts refined over countless generations. Many of the animals that shared the landscapes with our ancestors were masters of patience, capable of lying still for long stretches, watching from the shadows, waiting for distraction, weakness, or a single careless movement. And in the dim light of dusk or the deep darkness of night, those predators held a powerful advantage. Human eyes are well adapted for daylight. We see colour clearly, we judge distance well, and we can pick out details in bright conditions. But as the sun sinks and shadows lengthen, our vision weakens. Colours fade, edges blur, movement becomes harder to detect. For many predators, the opposite is true. Large cats, for example, possess a reflective layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum, which improves their ability to see in low light. It is the reason a cat's eyes seem to glow when caught in a beam of light. This adaptation allows them to gather and amplify the faintest illumination, turning darkness into something far more navigable than it appears to us. Imagine standing near a small fire at the edge of a clearing, the flames crackling softly, the light reaching only a short distance into the surrounding blackness. Beyond that circle, your eyes would see almost nothing. But out there, just beyond sight, a predator might see quite clearly. The shape of your body, the movement of your hands, the shifting glow of firelight against the ground. It is an unsettling thought, but it was once an ordinary reality. Among the most formidable hunters of the ancient world were the big cats. We often think of lions, leopards, and tigers as creatures of distant reserves or documentaries, but their ancestors and close relatives were far more widespread. There were cave lions roaming across Europe, leopards in regions where they no longer exist today, and saber-toothed cats occupying territories across multiple continents. Each species hunted differently, but all shared certain traits: powerful limbs, sharp, retractable claws, and the ability to move with remarkable silence. A stalking cat can place its paws with such care that even dry leaves may not crack beneath them. The body remains low, muscles coiled, every movement deliberate. The final rush, when it comes, is explosive, but by then it is often too late for the prey to react. For a solitary human, the chances of escaping such an attack were not high. Groups, however, had a better chance. Several people together could shout, throw stones, wave branches, and make themselves appear larger. Many predators are cautious by nature. Injury, even a small one, can be fatal in the wild, so they prefer prey that seems weak, distracted, or alone. This is one reason early humans stayed close to one another, especially at dawn and dusk, when predators were most active. But big cats were not the only hunters in the darkness. Hyenas, often misunderstood today, were among the most persistent and intelligent predators early humans faced. Some prehistoric species were larger and more robust than modern spotted hyenas. Their social groups were organized, their communication complex, and their endurance impressive. Unlike ambush predators, hyenas could pursue prey over long distances, wearing it down gradually. Their powerful jaws allowed them to consume nearly every part of an animal, leaving little behind. At night, their calls could carry across long distances, eerie whoops and laughter-like sounds that signaled communication between clan members. To human ears, those sounds must have been deeply unsettling, reminders that other hunters were active in the darkness. Wolves also played a significant role in many regions. Larger in some prehistoric populations than most wolves today, they hunted cooperatively, using coordination and persistence to isolate and exhaust prey. Their ability to track by scent and their stamina made them formidable opponents. A lone human encountering a pack of wolves would have been in serious danger. Even a small group of humans would have needed to stand together, using fire, noise, and thrown objects to discourage an approach. And then there were the bears. Large bears are not typically hunters of humans, but they are opportunistic and immensely powerful. The short-faced bear, which lived in North America, was one of the largest terrestrial carnivores known, capable of standing over 3 meters tall when upright. Its long legs suggest it may have been able to travel quickly over open ground, covering large distances in search of food. Encountering such an animal unexpectedly would have been terrifying. Avoidance, rather than confrontation, was the only realistic strategy. Predators were not limited to mammals either. In some regions, enormous birds of prey hunted small animals and occasionally larger ones. While attacks on adult humans would have been rare, children would have been vulnerable, and the presence of large aerial predators added yet another layer of caution to daily life. Reptiles, too, pose significant danger. Crocodiles and their relatives have existed for millions of years with remarkably little change, a sign of how effective their design is. Silent, patient, and powerful, they can remain motionless in water for long periods, striking with astonishing speed when prey comes close to drink. For early humans, approaching a riverbank required vigilance. Tracks in the mud, disturbed water, or the sudden absence of birds might signal danger. Learning to read these signs was essential. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of living among predators was not any single species. It was the unpredictability of encounters. A hunting party might move through an area that seemed quiet, only to stumble upon a predator feeding on a recent kill. A resting group might be approached by curious or desperate animals during a lean season. A child wandering only a short distance from camp might disappear in moments. These were not everyday events, but they happened often enough to shape behaviour deeply. Fear, in this context, was not irrational. It was information. It sharpened attention. It encouraged caution. It kept people close together and alert to subtle changes in their surroundings. And over time, humans became exceptionally good at detecting those changes. One of the most important skills was noticing silence. In many natural environments, birds, insects, and small animals create a constant background of sound. When a predator approaches, those sounds often stop abruptly. The forest or grassland grows suddenly still. To someone who has learned to recognize it, that stillness is as clear a warning as any shout. Smell also played a role. While humans are not as sensitive to scent as many animals, certain smells, the musk of a large carnivore, the sharp odour of a carcass, the damp reptilian scent of a crocodile's habitat, could signal danger. Wind direction mattered. Approaching water or moving through tall grass, early humans had to remain aware of how scent travelled. These forms of awareness required constant mental effort, but over generations they became second nature, habits passed down through observation and teaching. Another important factor was time of day. Many predators are crepuscular, meaning they are most active at dawn and dusk. These transitional periods, when light is dim but not absent, offer ideal conditions for hunters who rely on stealth. For humans, these were the most dangerous hours. Movement often slowed during these times. Camps were chosen with visibility in mind. Fires were prepared before darkness fell. Fire, once reliably controlled, became one of the most powerful tools humans possessed. Flames provided light, warmth, and a measure of protection. Many predators are wary of fire, not because they understand it, but because it is unfamiliar, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. A ring of firelight created a boundary, a small island of relative safety in a vast and uncertain landscape, but fire could not eliminate danger entirely. It required fuel, attention, and maintenance. If it went out, the darkness returned quickly, and with it, the advantage of predators. And so, through long nights, someone often remained awake, tending the fire, listening, watching the shifting edge of light and shadow. These quiet hours, filled with low conversation or silent vigilance, were part of daily life for countless generations. It is possible that many aspects of human culture, storytelling, shared memories, the habit of gathering around a fire to talk, have their roots in those nights when staying close together was the safest choice. Predators shaped not only how humans moved and hunted, but how they thought, how they organized themselves, how they related to one another. The presence of danger encouraged planning. Campsites were selected carefully, escape routes were considered, sleeping arrangements were organized so that vulnerable members of the group were protected. Children learned early to recognize warning signs, to stay close, to respond quickly when adults signaled danger. Knowledge of predators became part of collective memory, where lions were often seen, which valleys wolves used as travel routes, which watering holes were safest at certain times of day. This knowledge was as valuable as any tool. Over many generations, a kind of balance developed. Predators learned to recognize humans as unusual prey, sometimes dangerous, sometimes not worth the risk. Humans learned to recognize the patterns of predators, to avoid them when possible and to defend themselves when necessary. But the balance was never stable for long. Changes in climate, shifts in animal populations, and the gradual spread of humans into new territories meant that encounters with unfamiliar predators were inevitable. Each new landscape brought new dangers and new lessons, and slowly, very slowly, something began to change in the relationship between humans and the predators around them. Not because predators became weaker, but because humans became more organized, more cooperative, and more capable of shaping their environment. That transformation did not happen suddenly. For a long time, humans still lived in a world where the darkness held watching eyes, where every rustle in the grass demanded attention, and where survival depended on awareness, patience, and the quiet strength of staying together. Fear in the modern world is often treated as something to be avoided, something uncomfortable, something we try to push away or distract ourselves from. But in the ancient world, fear was not an inconvenience, it was a tool. For prey animals, fear is not panic or paralysis. It is information, a finely tuned system that helps them notice danger, react quickly, and survive long enough to see another day. And for early humans, living among predators, many of those same principles applied. To understand how humans learn to survive in such a dangerous environment, it helps to begin by looking at how other prey animals behave, because the natural world offers countless examples of strategy shaped by millions of years of evolution. If you watch a herd of antelope grazing on an open plain, you may notice that not all of them are eating at once. Some have their heads raised, scanning the horizon. Their ears turn constantly, catching sounds from different directions. Every few seconds, one animal shifts position, another looks up, another takes a few cautious steps. This is not random movement. It is vigilance. In many herd animals, individuals take turns being alert. Some graze while others watch, and then the roles change. This shared attention reduces the risk for everyone. A single distracted animal is vulnerable, but a group with many eyes and ears can detect danger earlier. Early humans adopted similar patterns. When a group stopped to rest, not everyone slept at once. Someone stayed awake, listening. When people gathered food or travelled, they remained aware of one another's positions. Children stayed close to adults. Movement through unfamiliar terrain was careful and deliberate. Fear guided these behaviours, but it was not overwhelming fear. It was a steady, quiet awareness, a background readiness that became part of daily life. Another common strategy among prey animals is staying in groups. A single animal is easier to target, easier to isolate, easier to chase. But a group presents complications. Predators must choose a target, navigate multiple moving bodies, and risk injury in the process. For humans, this advantage was even greater because groups could coordinate. They could shout, throw objects, and stand together to appear larger and more threatening. Even simple noise could discourage a predator that was uncertain or cautious. There is strength in numbers, not only physically, but psychologically. A predator approaching a group must consider the possibility of resistance. This principle still echoes in modern human behaviour. People walking alone at night often feel more vulnerable than those walking with companions, even in environments where predators are no longer a concern. The instinct remains, carried forward from a time when it mattered deeply. Prey animals also rely heavily on awareness of their surroundings. Many species position themselves so they can see open ground, avoid dense vegetation where ambush is more likely, and keep escape routes in mind. Early humans learned similar habits. Camps were often placed where visibility was good, near open areas or elevated ground. Natural barriers, cliffs, rivers, or thick stands of trees were used to limit the directions from which predators could approach. Paths to water were chosen carefully. Sleeping areas were arranged so that vulnerable individuals were protected in the centre of the group. These decisions were not formal strategies written down or taught in structured lessons. They were learned through experience, through observation, and sometimes through painful loss. One of the most important lessons prey animals learn is how to read signals in the environment. Birds taking flight suddenly, monkeys giving alarm calls, the abrupt silence of insects, all of these can indicate the presence of a predator. Humans became skilled at interpreting such signs. A distant flock of birds rising unexpectedly might mean a large animal moving below. The sudden stillness of grazing animals could signal danger nearby. Even subtle changes, a faint scent carried by the wind, disturbed soil, a broken branch, could provide clues. Over time, this awareness became second nature. It is interesting to consider how much of this sensitivity remains within us. Many people notice sudden silence or unfamiliar sounds instinctively. A loud noise can trigger an immediate reaction before the mind has time to analyse it. These responses are not learned consciously. They are part of an ancient system designed to keep us alive. Another lesson prey animals follow is conserving energy while staying ready to move. Running constantly is impossible. Exhaustion itself can be dangerous. So most animals alternate between periods of activity and rest, remaining alert even when still. Early humans did the same. Travel was often steady rather than hurried. Rest periods were frequent. Food gathering, tool making, and social interaction were balanced with vigilance. The rhythm of life was shaped not only by hunger and thirst, but by the need to remain aware without becoming exhausted. Fear, in this sense, was not a spike of terror, but a constant low hum, a quiet reminder to pay attention. Prey animals also rely on communication. Alarm calls are common across many species. Birds, monkeys, and even some rodents produce distinct sounds to signal different types of predators, aerial, ground-based, or approaching from a distance. Humans developed their own forms of warning. Early vocalizations, gestures, and expressions conveyed urgency, direction, and danger. A shout could alert others instantly. A pointed hand could guide attention to a threat. Communication allowed groups to react faster and more effectively than individuals acting alone. And there was another lesson, one that may not seem obvious at first. Prey animals are cautious about routine. If a herd visits the same water source at exactly the same time every day, predators can learn that pattern and use it. Many animals vary their movements slightly, changing paths, altering schedules, remaining unpredictable. Early humans also benefited from this kind of flexibility. Camps were moved periodically, routes varied. Groups did not remain in one place longer than necessary, unless conditions were especially favourable. Movement itself was a form of protection. Yet living with constant awareness and caution was not easy. It required mental energy, emotional resilience, and social support. Fear, if it becomes overwhelming, can paralyze. But fear, when balanced with knowledge and experience, becomes something different. It becomes vigilance, and vigilance, sustained over generations, shaped the human mind. One of the ways this shaping occurred was through learning. Children observed adults closely, absorbing habits without formal instruction. They learned to notice tracks, to listen for unusual sounds, to stay within sight of the group. Play itself may have served as practice. Games of chasing, hiding, and exploring helped develop coordination, awareness, and quick reactions. Skills that seem recreational today may have once been rehearsals for survival. Another important factor was trust. Living in a dangerous world meant relying on others not only for protection, but for emotional stability. Shared experiences of fear, shared relief after danger passed, and shared responsibility for one another strengthened bonds within groups. Fear, in this way, became something collective rather than isolating. There is comfort in knowing that others are alert, that someone else is listening, that the group is watching together. This shared vigilance reduced stress and allowed individuals to rest more fully when it was their turn to sleep. Even today, many people feel more relaxed sleeping in a house with others than alone in an unfamiliar place. The presence of others provides reassurance, even if no conscious threat exists. Another lesson from prey animals is knowing when to freeze and when to flee. Sudden movement can attract attention. Remaining still, blending into surroundings, or moving slowly can sometimes be safer. Many animals rely on camouflage or stillness to avoid detection. Early humans, though not camouflaged in the biological sense, could use terrain, shadows, and silence to reduce visibility. Moving quietly, avoiding open ground when danger was suspected, and using natural cover were all part of survival. And then there was the lesson of timing. Predators often hunt at predictable times, dawn and dusk when light is low and prey is active. Prey animals adjust their behavior accordingly, becoming more cautious during these periods. Humans did the same. Movement slowed as evening approached. Fires were prepared before darkness fell. Groups gathered closer together. The transition from day to night was not casual. It was deliberate. Over many generations, these patterns became deeply ingrained, shaping daily rhythms and seasonal movements. Yet despite all these precautions, danger could never be eliminated entirely. Loss was part of life. Injuries happened. Encounters with predators sometimes ended badly. These experiences, though painful, reinforced the importance of vigilance and cooperation. They also strengthened memory. Humans are uniquely capable of remembering events in detail and sharing those memories through storytelling. A dangerous encounter could be described, analysed, and remembered by others who had not been present. In this way, knowledge spread beyond individual experience. Stories became a form of protection. A warning about a particular valley, a river crossing, or a predator's territory could guide future decisions. The spoken word became as valuable as any tool, and gradually something remarkable began to happen. Humans were not only reacting to fear, they were learning from it, anticipating it, and sometimes even using it to their advantage. Predators rely on surprise, but a prey species that anticipates danger reduces the effectiveness of surprise. Over time, as humans became more organized, more aware and more cooperative, some predators began to treat humans with greater caution. But at this stage in the story, humans were still living in a world where fear was a daily companion, where survival depended on awareness, cooperation, and the quiet discipline of paying attention. Fire changed the night, but it did not at first solve the deeper problem of safety. A small circle of light could push the darkness back a few meters, and the warmth could ease the cold. Yet beyond that flickering boundary, the world remained vast and uncertain. Predators could still pass nearby. Wind could carry scents. Rain could extinguish flames. And even with fire, early humans still needed places where they could rest, with a little more protection than open ground could provide. So long before permanent homes or even simple huts became common, humans began to seek out something more basic, shelter in its most fundamental form. Not buildings, not structures in the modern sense, but places in the landscape itself that offered advantage. Places that reduced exposure, limited the directions from which danger could approach, and allowed a group to sleep without every sense straining to its limit. One of the earliest and most accessible forms of shelter was simply height. Trees, especially large ones with strong branches, provided something precious in a dangerous world, distance from ground-based predators. Many animals cannot climb well, and even those that can often prefer easier prey. Sleeping above the ground, wedged securely among branches, offered a measure of safety that open plains could not. There is evidence that some early human ancestors, long before the appearance of our own species, may have slept in trees regularly. Even after humans became fully adapted to life on the ground, the instinct to seek elevation did not disappear immediately. In forested regions, climbing to rest or to escape danger remained a useful option. Imagine the experience of spending a night in such a place. The rough bark beneath your hands, the slow sway of branches in the wind, the distant sounds of insects and animals below. Sleep would come lightly, never fully deep, interrupted by small movements, by changes in sound, by the constant need to remain aware. It was not comfortable by modern standards, but it was safer than lying exposed on the ground, and safety, even imperfect safety, was enough. Over time, humans also learned to look for natural shelters formed by the land itself. Rocky overhangs, shallow caves, and cliff recesses provided protection from wind and rain, but just as importantly, they reduced the number of directions from which an attack could come. A group resting beneath an overhang needed to watch only the open side rather than all around. This may seem like a small advantage, but in a world where vigilance was constant, reducing uncertainty even slightly made a profound difference. Caves in particular became important refuges in many regions. Not all caves were suitable, of course. Some were damp, cold, or already occupied by animals. Bears, big cats, and hyenas also valued caves, and entering one without caution could be extremely dangerous. Early humans had to learn to read the signs. Tracks near the entrance, bones scattered inside, the smell of an animal's den. These clues determined whether a cave offered safety or danger. When a suitable cave was found, it could become a temporary home, a place where firelight could be maintained, where tools could be shaped, where food could be shared, and where stories, perhaps the earliest stories, were told in flickering shadows on stone walls. The psychological effect of such shelter must have been significant. A roof overhead, even a rough stone one, changes how a person feels. The sound of wind becomes distant. The darkness seems less oppressive. Sleep, though still cautious, comes a little more easily. Even today, many people feel a sense of comfort in enclosed spaces, rooms, tents, or shelters, especially when compared to open, exposed environments. That comfort may have deep roots in these ancient experiences, but caves were not always available, and humans were highly adaptable. In open landscapes, they began to create simple shelters using materials at hand: branches, leaves, grasses, and animal hides. These early structures were not permanent buildings. They were temporary, quickly assembled, easily abandoned when groups moved on. A few branches leaned together, covered with foliage, could break the wind. A ring of stones could help contain a fire. A shallow depression in the ground, lined with dry grass, could make resting slightly more comfortable. These small improvements, modest as they seem, added up. Each one reduced exposure, conserved body heat, and made survival a little easier. Fire, meanwhile, remained at the centre of these shelters whenever possible. It provided more than warmth and light. Smoke helped keep insects away. The crackling of flames and the shifting glow created a sensory boundary that many animals hesitated to cross. Predators, cautious by nature, often avoid unfamiliar stimuli, and fire was unlike anything they encountered in the natural world. It moved, it changed shape, It emitted heat and light and sound. For animals guided by instinct, this combination signalled uncertainty, and uncertainty often meant risk. That hesitation gave humans an advantage, not complete safety, but time to react, time to gather together, time to defend themselves if necessary. Maintaining fire, however, required effort. Fuel had to be gathered, sometimes from considerable distances. Dry wood burned best, but in wet seasons it could be difficult to find. Fires had to be watched, fed, and protected from wind and rain. This responsibility likely fell to different members of the group at different times. Someone would wake in the night to add wood, to stir embers, to ensure that the small circle of safety did not fade into darkness. These quiet moments, tending a fire while others slept, may have been some of the first opportunities for reflection, for watching the stars, for thinking beyond immediate tasks. The rhythm of firelight and shadow, the steady breathing of companions nearby, the distant sounds of the night, all of this created a setting unlike any other in the natural world. A place where humans could rest, not completely without fear, but with a little more peace than the open land allowed. Shelter also shaped how groups organised themselves. Sleeping arrangements mattered. Children and the injured were placed where they were most protected. Stronger adults often rested closer to the edges. Tools were kept within reach. Paths to escape routes were considered. These patterns were not written rules, but habits formed through experience. Weather added another layer of importance to shelter. Cold nights could be deadly without protection. Wind strips heat from the body quickly, and rain can chill even in mild temperatures. A simple barrier, a wall of branches, a rock face blocking the wind, could mean the difference between discomfort and danger. In colder regions, shelters became more substantial. Animal hides were used as coverings. Snow, surprisingly, could serve as insulation when shaped properly. Natural depressions in the land provided protection from wind. Every region encouraged different solutions, shaped by available materials and local conditions. This adaptability became one of humanity's greatest strengths. Unlike many animals which depend on specific habitats, humans learned to modify their surroundings, to create small pockets of habitability within environments that might otherwise have been hostile. And yet, even the best shelter could not eliminate risk entirely. Predators sometimes approached camps, drawn by the smell of food or the faint glow of firelight. Storms could damage shelters. Floods could force sudden movement. The land itself was never completely predictable. This uncertainty reinforced an important lesson: never become too comfortable. Groups remained ready to move when necessary. Belongings were few and portable. Knowledge of multiple shelter locations was valuable. A cave used one season might be abandoned the next if conditions changed or predators moved into the area. Movement was not just a response to danger, it was part of life. And with movement came familiarity with landscapes, knowledge of where shelter could be found, which valleys offered protection, which ridges provided visibility, which forests contained suitable trees for resting or building simple structures. This knowledge was shared, taught, and remembered. Children learned which caves were safe, which trees were strong, which places to avoid. These lessons were not abstract. They were tied to real locations, real experiences, sometimes real losses. In this way, shelter became more than physical protection. It became part of culture, part of memory, part of the shared understanding that allowed groups to survive. There is also something quietly profound about the human tendency to gather in sheltered places. Even today, people instinctively seek corners, walls, and enclosed spaces when they want to feel secure. Restaurants with booths often feel more comfortable than those with open seating. A chair with a wall behind it feels safer than one in the middle of a room. These preferences are subtle, often unnoticed, but they may echo ancient instincts shaped by thousands of nights spent choosing where to rest, where to sit, where to watch. Over long stretches of time, the search for shelter gradually became more sophisticated. Structures grew more deliberate, materials were selected more carefully, knowledge accumulated, passed from one generation to the next. But at this point in the story, shelters were still simple, temporary, closely tied to the natural world rather than separate from it. Humans were not yet builders of villages or cities. They were travellers, adapting to landscapes, using what the land offered, finding safety where they could. And always, at the centre of that safety, whenever possible, was firelight, flickering, shifting, pushing back the darkness just enough to allow rest, just enough to allow conversation, just enough to create a fragile island of warmth and security in a vast and unpredictable world. Yet fire and shelter did something else as well, something less obvious but perhaps even more important. They brought people together, sitting close around a fire, sharing warmth, sharing food, sharing stories of the day's events. These moments strengthened bonds. Trust grew, communication improved, plans were made, knowledge was exchanged. The circle of firelight became not only a barrier against predators, but a centre of social life, a place where cooperation deepened and where the foundations of human society slowly took shape. At some point, long before anyone recorded a date or carved symbols into stone, a small group of humans sat near something that most animals instinctively feared, but did not understand. It flickered, shifted, and moved without muscles or bones. It crackled and hissed. It gave off heat that could be felt from a distance, and light that pushed the darkness back in a way nothing else in nature could quite match. Fire had existed on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, started by lightning, volcanic activity, or dry vegetation igniting under intense heat. For most animals, fire was simply something to flee from, a destructive force that swept through forests and grasslands, leaving charred ground behind. But at some point humans began not only to observe fire, but to keep it, to carry it, and eventually to create it. That shift changed everything. Before fire, night was a time of severe limitation. Darkness reduced vision, lowered body temperature, and gave an advantage to predators whose senses were better suited to low light. Activity slowed, movement became cautious, sleep was shallow and often interrupted. With fire, the night began to change. A small flame does not seem like much, especially from the perspective of a modern world filled with electric lights and heating systems. But in a landscape otherwise ruled by darkness, even a modest fire transformed the immediate environment. Shadows retreated, faces became visible, the ground nearby could be seen clearly. Sounds could be interpreted more easily when the eyes could confirm what the ears suspected. And beyond the circle of light, something else happened. Many predators hesitated. It was not that fire made humans invincible. A determined predator, or one driven by hunger, could still approach. But fire introduced uncertainty. Flames move unpredictably. Sparks leap upward. Heat radiates in waves. Smoke stings the eyes and nose. For animals guided by instinct, this combination of unfamiliar sensations often signaled danger. Caution is deeply ingrained in predators. An injury, even a small one, can mean starvation. So anything unfamiliar, anything that might cause harm, is approached carefully or avoided altogether. This hesitation gave humans something they had rarely possessed before, a defensive advantage that did not depend on speed or strength. For the first time, the night did not belong entirely to the hunters. Early fires were probably not made deliberately at first. More likely, humans learned to preserve flames from natural sources, carrying embers in smouldering wood or dried plant material, feeding the fire carefully to keep it alive. Maintaining fire required attention. Someone had to watch it, add fuel, protect it from wind or rain. Fire became a responsibility, not just a tool, and as humans grew more skilled at controlling it, they began to use it in ways that extended far beyond warmth and light. One of the most immediate benefits was protection during sleep. A fire placed at the edge of a resting area created a barrier that many animals were reluctant to cross. The glow and heat signalled something unnatural, something unpredictable. This did not eliminate the need for vigilance, but it reduced the intensity of fear. People could rest more deeply, knowing that the fire itself was part of their defence. Deeper rest meant clearer thinking, better coordination, stronger bodies. Over generations, even small improvements in sleep could have profound effects on health and survival. Fire also extended the usable hours of the day. Without fire, activity was limited to daylight. With fire, people could remain awake after sunset, repairing tools, preparing food, or simply talking. Those quiet hours may have played an important role in the development of human communication and social bonds. Sitting together in firelight, faces illuminated, gestures visible, voices carrying in the still air, these conditions encouraged interaction in ways that daylight activity did not. Stories may have begun in such moments, not as entertainment at first, but as a way to share information, to describe dangerous encounters, to remember safe paths, to pass on knowledge. Fire created a space where memory and experience could be exchanged. Another profound change came from cooking. Raw food is often difficult to chew and digest. Cooking softens meat, breaks down plant fibres, and makes nutrients more accessible. It also kills many harmful microorganisms, reducing the risk of illness. With cooked food, humans could extract more energy from what they ate. This extra energy supported larger brains, longer childhoods, and more complex social behaviour over evolutionary time. Cooking also changed daily rhythms. Food could be prepared and shared at the end of the day, encouraging gatherings around the fire. The act of eating together reinforced social bonds and cooperation in turn strengthened defence. Firelight also changed how humans perceived the night itself. Darkness was no longer absolute. Shadows flickered and shifted, but the immediate surroundings remained visible. The sounds of nocturnal animals could be interpreted more easily when paired with sight. Fear did not disappear, but it became more manageable, more contained. There is something deeply reassuring about a small, steady flame in the dark, even today. People still gather around campfires, still feel a sense of calm watching flames dance. That comfort may be an echo of countless nights when fire meant safety, warmth, and survival. But fire was not only defensive, it could also be used actively. Torches allowed humans to move short distances at night, to explore caves, to search for lost items, or to drive animals away. Smoke could be used to discourage insects or to flush small animals from hiding places. In some landscapes, controlled burning of vegetation may have been used to clear areas, encourage the growth of certain plants, or drive game into more accessible locations. This practice, used by many traditional societies even in recent history, shows how fire became a tool for shaping the environment itself. Yet fire also carried risks. A fire left unattended could spread, especially in dry conditions. Burns were possible. Smoke inhalation could be harmful in enclosed spaces. Gathering fuel required time and effort, sometimes forcing people to travel farther from camp than was safe. Managing fire required knowledge and discipline. Children had to be taught to respect it. Fires had to be built carefully, contained with stones or cleared ground. Fuel had to be chosen wisely, dry wood for steady burning, smaller branches to maintain flames, larger logs to sustain heat through the night. These practices became part of daily routine, repeated again and again until they were second nature. Fire also influenced where people chose to live. Shelters and camps were often arranged around a central hearth. Caves with good ventilation were preferred. Areas with access to fuel, fallen branches, dry grass became more attractive. The landscape itself was evaluated not only for food and water, but for firewood. And as humans spread into colder regions, fire became essential. Without it, survival in harsh climates would have been nearly impossible. Warmth, protection from frost, the ability to dry clothing or hides, all of these depended on reliable fire. In this way, fire allowed humans to expand into environments that would otherwise have been beyond their reach. But perhaps the most subtle change fire brought was psychological. Fear of the dark is common even today, especially in children. The unknown beyond the reach of sight triggers ancient instincts. A small light, even a candle, can reduce that fear significantly. For early humans, fire transformed the night from a time of almost complete vulnerability into a time of relative safety. The difference was not absolute, but it was enough to change behaviour, to allow more rest, more conversation, more planning. Planning in particular became increasingly important. With longer evenings and stronger social bonds, groups could discuss the next day's movements, the locations of water sources, the signs of predators, the best routes to travel. Decisions were no longer made only in the moment but in advance. This ability to think ahead, to prepare, to coordinate, became one of humanity's greatest strengths. Fire also made predators more cautious around human camps over time. Animals learn through experience. A predator that approached a fire and felt the heat, or saw humans reacting together, might choose easier prey in the future. Gradually, humans began to occupy a different position in the mental landscape of other animals, no longer simply prey, but something unfamiliar, something potentially dangerous. This shift was slow, uneven, and incomplete, but it marked the beginning of a long transformation. Still, fire did not solve every problem. Daytime dangers remained. Encounters with predators still occurred. Injuries, illness, and hunger were constant challenges. Fire was not a guarantee of safety, but it was the first true defense that humans could control directly. Not dependent on the terrain, not dependent on numbers alone, but something portable, maintainable, and powerful. And perhaps most importantly, fire required cooperation. A fire large enough to last through the night needed fuel gathered by many hands. Someone had to tend it. Others prepared food, others kept watch. Responsibilities were shared, roles distributed, efforts coordinated. This cooperation strengthened social structures, encouraging communication, trust, and shared purpose. The circle of firelight became not just a barrier against predators, but a centre of community. Within that circle, people learned from one another, observed one another, and gradually developed ways of working together that went far beyond simple survival. Watching together, acting together, responding to danger as a coordinated group rather than scattered individuals, these behaviours began to define what it meant to be human, and as these patterns deepened, the balance between humans and the predators around them began, very slowly, to shift. Some changes in human history happened suddenly, sparked by discoveries like fire or tools shaped in new ways. Others unfolded so gradually that no single generation could have noticed them happening. The growth of cooperation was one of those slow transformations, a quiet shift that changed how humans survived long before it changed how they lived. To understand how important this shift was, it helps to imagine again what life was like for a lone individual in the ancient world. A single person could only look in one direction at a time. Hearing might catch sounds from elsewhere, but sight remained limited. Sleep was shallow because deep sleep meant vulnerability. Gathering food required constant scanning of the surroundings. Even drinking water meant lowering the head and temporarily losing awareness of what might be approaching. A solitary human had narrow margins for error, but a group changed everything. When several people rested together, they could divide attention naturally. One person watched the open ground while another listened for movement in the brush. Someone else prepared food or tended the fire. These roles were not always assigned formally, yet over time patterns emerged. People became sensitive to what others were doing. If one person stood suddenly and stared into the distance, others noticed immediately. Awareness spread through the group like a ripple. This shared vigilance did more than improve safety, it reduced strain. No one individual had to remain alert every moment. People could relax in turns, sleep in turns, recover their strength. The group itself became a kind of living shield, made not of muscle or bone but of attention. Many animals use similar strategies. Herds of deer, flocks of birds, and troops of primates rely on collective awareness to detect danger. Yet human cooperation gradually went further because humans could communicate in increasingly sophisticated ways. A glance, a gesture, a sound. These could carry meaning. A raised hand could signal silence. A pointed finger could indicate direction. A whispered word could warn of danger without causing panic. Communication allowed the group to function as something more than a collection of individuals. It allowed them to act as a coordinated whole. This coordination became especially important when moving through unfamiliar territory. Travelling in a line, individuals could watch different areas. Those at the front looked ahead for obstacles or signs of predators. Those at the rear ensured nothing followed too closely. People in the middle stayed close to children or those carrying supplies. Movement itself became organised, and over time, humans began to recognise something that many predators already understood, that confusion can be powerful. When threatened, a group of humans could shout, wave branches, throw stones, and move together in ways that made them appear larger and more unpredictable. Many predators, faced with such behaviour, hesitated. Hesitation is often enough to break an attack. This did not always work, of course. Hunger can override caution. But often it was enough to turn a predator away, to convince it to search for easier prey elsewhere. Cooperation also allowed humans to defend injured members of the group. A wounded individual alone would be unlikely to survive for long, but within a group others could help carry food, offer protection, and allow time for recovery. There is archaeological evidence of individuals who lived for years with serious injuries or disabilities that would have made solitary survival impossible. This suggests not only cooperation, but care, patience, and a willingness to invest effort in the well-being of others. Such behaviour is rare in the natural world. It requires more than instinct. It requires empathy. Empathy in turn strengthens bonds, and strong bonds make cooperation more reliable. Over many generations, these social connections became one of humanity's greatest strengths. Another important aspect of watching together was learning together. When one person noticed a sign of danger, others learned to recognise it as well. A particular track in the mud, a certain pattern of broken grass, the distant call of a bird that meant a predator was nearby. These observations spread through the group. Knowledge did not remain isolated within one mind. It became shared memory. Shared memory is powerful. It allows a group to respond to threats more quickly, to avoid dangers before encountering them directly, and to pass information to younger members who have not yet experienced those dangers themselves. Children, especially, benefited from this system. Instead of learning only through personal experience, which can be costly or fatal, they could learn by observing adults, by listening to warnings, by participating in group activities. Play may have served an important role here. Games of chasing, hiding, and exploring allowed children to practice coordination, awareness, and communication in ways that prepared them for real situations later in life. Watching together also changed how humans use their senses. Hearing, for example, became more effective when multiple people listened. One person might notice a distant sound that others missed. Another might recognise a scent or a subtle movement. Each individual contributed a piece of information, and together those pieces formed a clearer picture. This pooling of perception made humans far more effective at detecting danger than any one person could be alone. There is something remarkable about this, because it meant that the group itself became a kind of sensory system, with many eyes, many ears, and many minds working together. And this collective awareness extended beyond defence. Hunting too benefited from cooperation. Even before humans became skilled hunters of large animals, they learned to work together to corner smaller prey. to drive animals toward natural barriers, or to take advantage of terrain. Coordination allowed them to accomplish tasks that would have been impossible individually. But cooperation requires trust. Trust that others will remain alert when it is their turn to watch. Trust that warnings will be given honestly. Trust that food will be shared, that injuries will be treated with care, that no one will be abandoned without reason. Trust does not appear instantly. It grows through repeated experience, through countless small acts of reliability. A person who consistently contributes to the group becomes valued. Someone who fails to cooperate risks being excluded, which in a dangerous world could mean death. In this way, cooperation was reinforced not only by its benefits, but by its necessity. Over time, social rules began to emerge. Not written laws, but shared expectations about behaviour, about fairness, about responsibility. These expectations formed the beginnings of culture. Culture, in this sense, was not art or decoration, but a system of shared knowledge and behaviour that improved survival. Knowing how to watch together, how to respond to danger, how to divide tasks, how to care for one another, these were cultural skills passed from generation to generation. Another subtle but important effect of cooperation was the reduction of fear. Fear is easier to bear when shared. Sitting alone in darkness, every sound feels magnified. Sitting with others, those same sounds feel less overwhelming. Conversation, even quiet conversation, provides reassurance. The presence of others allows the mind to rest. Rest, in turn, improves decision-making, coordination and health. A well-rested group is more effective than an exhausted one. Cooperation made rest possible in a way solitary life could not. Firelight often served as the centre of this cooperative space. People gathered around it not only for warmth but for safety and companionship. Stories were told, plans discussed, tools repaired. These gatherings strengthened social bonds and reinforced shared knowledge. Over many generations, these patterns became deeply ingrained. Even today, people often prefer to work, travel and relax in groups. Meetings, teams, families, communities, these structures reflect an ancient tendency to rely on others. And there is another layer to this story. Watching together did not only mean observing the environment, it also meant observing each other. Humans are exceptionally skilled at reading expressions, gestures and tones of voice. A slight change in posture, a glance, a tightening of the jaw, these subtle signals convey information about mood, intention and awareness. This ability to read one another allowed groups to coordinate more smoothly, to sense unease or alertness before a word was spoken. It also strengthened empathy, the ability to understand what others feel, which in turn reinforced cooperation. The human mind, shaped by thousands of generations of living in close groups, became finely tuned to social cues. This sensitivity remains with us today. We notice when someone in a room becomes tense. We sense when a conversation changes tone. These abilities, often taken for granted, are part of a long evolutionary history of living and surviving together, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance between humans and predators began to shift. Not because predators grew weaker, but because humans, working together, became harder to isolate, harder to surprise, harder to overcome. Predators rely on targeting individuals. Cooperation made humans a collective target, and collective targets are more difficult to attack. This did not mean humans were safe, far from it. Danger remained a constant presence, but the margin of safety widened slightly. A little more rest, a little more warning, a little more time to react. These small advantages accumulated over generations, shaping the course of human history in ways no one at the time could have understood. Long before writing, long before symbols carved into stone or painted on cave walls, there was a moment when one human made a sound and another understood it not as noise, but as meaning. That shift, simple as it seems, marked one of the most important turning points in the long struggle for survival. Because in a world filled with predators, The ability to warn others quickly and clearly could mean the difference between life and death. Many animals communicate danger. Birds give alarm calls. Monkeys produce distinct sounds for different predators. Even small mammals use high-pitched cries to alert others nearby. These signals are often instinctive, shaped by evolution rather than learned deliberately. Humans, however, developed something more flexible. Early human communication probably began with gestures, facial expressions, and simple vocal sounds. A sudden shout, a sharp intake of breath, or a hand raised abruptly could signal danger. These early warnings were immediate, instinctive, and effective at short distances. But over time, communication grew more detailed. Different sounds began to carry different meanings. A certain tone might signal a predator nearby. Another might indicate danger at a distance. A gesture might point toward a direction. Gradually, these signals became more structured, more consistent, more easily understood by everyone in the group. This growing ability to communicate allowed humans to respond faster and more effectively to threats. Imagine a small group moving through tall grass. One person at the front notices a faint movement, perhaps the flick of a tail or the ripple of vegetation. Without communication, that person alone might react, but others would remain unaware until it was too late. With communication, a quiet warning could spread instantly. Heads would lift. Movement would stop. The group could change direction or prepare to defend itself. Time, even a few seconds of extra time, can be critical in the wild. Communication also allowed warnings to be shared after danger had passed. A person who encountered a predator near a water source could describe the location, the time of day, and the signs to watch for. Others could avoid that area or approach it with greater caution. In this way, communication extended awareness beyond the immediate moment. Knowledge of danger could travel across space and across time. This was a profound advantage. Most animals learn primarily through direct experience or observation. Humans began to learn through stories. A story about a dangerous valley, told by someone who had seen it, could guide others who had never been there. A description of a predator's behavior could prepare listeners for encounters they had not yet experienced. Stories became tools of survival. They did more than entertain or pass time. They preserved memory, organized knowledge, and allowed one generation to benefit from the experiences of another. This ability to share knowledge accumulated slowly, but its effects were enormous. Each generation began life not from zero, but from a foundation built by those who came before. Language, even in its earliest forms, allowed humans to build that foundation. It also strengthened cooperation. Coordinating group activities requires more than awareness. It requires planning, assigning roles, and adjusting actions in response to changing conditions. Communication made this possible. During hunts, individuals could signal when to move, when to remain still, when to drive animals in a certain direction. During travel, leaders could indicate routes, warn of obstacles, or call for rest. Even daily tasks, gathering food, building shelters, tending fires, became more efficient when people could communicate clearly. Communication also played a role in emotional support, though this may be less obvious at first. Living in a dangerous world creates stress. Fear, uncertainty, and loss are difficult to bear alone. The ability to speak, to share concerns, to comfort one another, helped maintain group cohesion and psychological resilience. A few reassuring words, a shared laugh, or a story told around a fire could ease tension and strengthen bonds. These bonds, in turn, made cooperation more reliable. Another important aspect of communication was teaching. Children do not instinctively know how to recognize predator tracks, how to interpret bird calls, or how to choose safe paths through unfamiliar terrain. These skills must be learned. Language made teaching more effective. Instead of relying only on demonstration, adults could explain, describe, and answer questions. They could correct mistakes and provide guidance before danger occurred. This accelerated learning, allowing young members of the group to become competent more quickly. Over many generations, teaching became one of the defining features of human societies. Communication also allowed groups to develop shared signals that could be understood even in noisy or low-light conditions. Whistles, clicks, or specific calls could carry over distance. Hand signals could convey meaning silently. These methods reduced the risk of attracting predators while still allowing coordination. In dense forests or at night, such signals would have been especially valuable. Another subtle but powerful effect of communication was the ability to imagine and discuss the future. Animals respond to immediate conditions. Humans began to anticipate. A group might discuss where predators had been seen recently and decide to move camp. They might plan a route to a water source known to be safer. They might prepare extra fuel for a long night. Planning requires shared understanding, and shared understanding depends on communication. Language also helped humans develop a sense of identity and belonging. Names for individuals or places allowed people to refer to specific locations or companions quickly and clearly. Recognizing who was speaking, who was being addressed, and what was being discussed made coordination smoother. Belonging to a group, knowing that others recognized and valued you, strengthened social bonds and increased willingness to cooperate. Over time, communication became more complex. Vocabulary expanded. Grammar began to emerge, allowing more precise expression of ideas. This complexity did not appear overnight. It evolved gradually, shaped by countless interactions, corrections, and innovations. But even in its earliest forms, language provided a decisive advantage. It allowed humans to pool not only their physical strength and awareness, but their knowledge. Knowledge is a powerful form of defense. Knowing where danger is likely to appear, how predators behold, what signs to watch for, all of this reduces risk. And knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. There is another dimension to communication that is worth considering. Humans do not only warn of danger, they also encourage, reassure, and coordinate through positive signals. A word of praise, a gesture of approval, a shared smile. These reinforce cooperation and motivate individuals to contribute to the group. Positive communication strengthens morale, and morale matters, especially in difficult conditions. A group that trusts and supports one another is more resilient than one divided by fear or conflict. Of course, communication is not always perfect. Misunderstandings occur. Signals may be misinterpreted. Warnings may be delayed or unclear. But overall, the benefits far outweigh the risks. Over thousands of years, the ability to communicate effectively became one of the defining characteristics of our species. It allowed humans not only to survive in a dangerous world, but to adapt to new environments, to share innovations, and to build increasingly complex societies. Long before humans became skilled hunters capable of bringing down large animals on their own, survival often depended on a quieter and far more dangerous strategy. Instead of chasing prey across open land or surrounding herds with coordinated attacks, early humans frequently waited, watched, and approached only after another predator had already done the killing. This stage of human life is sometimes overlooked, yet it was one of the most important periods in our development. It was a time when humans lived on the edge of someone else's success, surviving by taking what remained after the giants of the ancient world had fed. And this was not an easy or gentle way to live. A carcass in the wild does not sit unattended for long. The smell of blood travels quickly, carried by wind, picked up by noses far more sensitive than our own. Vultures circle high above, their keen eyesight scanning the ground. Hyenas, jackals, and other scavengers move with purpose, guided by scent and sound. Approaching such a place meant entering a crowded and often hostile environment. Early humans had to be patient. Charging toward a fresh kill while the original predator was still feeding would have been suicidal. Large cats defend their kills fiercely. A lion or saber-toothed cat could easily overpower a human who came too close. Even smaller predators, when guarding food, can become extremely aggressive, so humans learned to watch from a distance. They observed the behavior of predators, learning how long they tended to remain at a kill, how they reacted to disturbances, and how to judge when it might be safe to approach. This required careful attention, sometimes waiting for hours, sometimes even returning the next day. Patience became a survival skill. And waiting was not passive. While watching from a safe distance, early humans studied the landscape, noting escape routes, the direction of the wind, the movement of other scavengers. They listened for sounds that might signal the return of the predator. This constant observation sharpened their awareness in ways that would later prove essential for hunting. When the moment finally came, speed and coordination mattered. A group would move in quickly, working together to cut away pieces of meat, break bones for marrow, and gather what they could before other scavengers arrived or the original predator returned. Time was limited. Every movement had to be efficient. Stone tools, simple as they were, played a crucial role here. Sharp flakes of stone could slice through flesh far more effectively than teeth or fingernails. Breaking bones with stones allowed access to marrow, a rich source of fat and nutrients. These tools turned scavenging into a viable strategy rather than a desperate gamble. It is important to understand how valuable such food was. Meat and marrow provided concentrated energy, supporting the growth of larger brains and more active lifestyles. Even small amounts could make a significant difference in health and survival. But scavenging was never without risk. Hyenas, for example, were formidable competitors. They could arrive in large groups, moving quickly, communicating with eerie calls that carried across the landscape. Their powerful jaws and aggressive behavior made them dangerous adversaries. Humans could sometimes drive them away by standing together, shouting and throwing stones, but this was not always successful. Often, the safest choice was to retreat, leaving part of the carcass behind. Vultures, though not dangerous themselves, created another challenge. Their presence signaled to other predators that food was available. A flock descending from the sky could turn a quiet, scavenging opportunity into a chaotic scramble. Even insects played a role. Flies arrived quickly, laying eggs, beginning the rapid process of decay. Heat and time worked against those who hoped to gather fresh meat. All of this meant that scavenging demanded not only courage, but judgment. Approach too soon, and the predator might still be nearby. Wait too long, and little would remain worth taking. Learning to make these decisions required experience, and experience was often gained at great cost. Over generations, however, humans became more skilled. They learned to interpret the behavior of birds, to read tracks and signs, to recognize how long a carcass had been lying by its smell and appearance. Knowledge accumulated, shared through observation and communication. Scavenging also encouraged cooperation in new ways. Carrying large pieces of meat required multiple people. Protecting those who worked on the carcass required others to stand watch. Transporting food back to camp demanded coordination and planning. These activities strengthened social bonds and reinforced the importance of working together. Another unexpected benefit of scavenging was that it brought humans into close contact with the remains of large animals. Cutting through hide, muscle and bone provided opportunities to learn about anatomy, about how bodies are structured, where joints are located, how bones break. This knowledge later proved valuable in hunting, but at the time it was simply part of the process of obtaining food. Fire too changed scavenging. Cooked meat is safer and easier to eat than raw meat, especially when the freshness of the carcass is uncertain. Bringing food back to a fire allowed humans to reduce the risk of disease and make tough meat more digestible. Fire also helped preserve food for short periods, drying or smoking small amounts so they could be eaten later. These practices extended the value of each successful scavenging trip. But perhaps the most significant change brought by scavenging was psychological. Approaching a carcass left by a powerful predator required overcoming fear. It required assessing risk calmly, acting quickly, and trusting in the group's ability to respond if danger appeared. These experiences built confidence. Humans began to see themselves not only as vulnerable prey, but as capable opportunists, able to take advantage of situations created by larger, stronger animals. This shift in perception was subtle, but important. It marked the beginning of a new relationship with the natural world, one in which humans were not merely reacting to events, but actively seeking opportunities. Scavenging also influenced movement patterns. Groups often followed herds of large herbivores, not only for potential hunting in the future, but for the chance to find carcasses left behind by predators or natural causes. Following herds required knowledge of migration routes, seasonal changes, and water sources. These journeys expanded human familiarity with large territories, encouraging exploration and adaptation. Travelling in this way was not easy. Carrying tools, caring for children, and staying alert to danger demanded constant effort. But it allowed humans to access resources that would otherwise have been unavailable. Another consequence of scavenging was the gradual development of more effective tools. Cutting meat from bones, breaking bones efficiently, and processing hides all encouraged experimentation with different stone shapes and techniques. Sharper edges, stronger points, more durable tools. These innovations improved efficiency and reduced the time spent exposed at carcasses. Reduced time meant reduced risk. Over thousands of years, these improvements accumulated, slowly transforming human capabilities. It is worth noting that scavenging was not a sign of weakness or failure. Many animals, including some of the most formidable predators, scavenge when the opportunity arises. It is an efficient way to obtain food with less energy expenditure. For early humans, scavenging was not merely a fallback strategy. It was a central part of survival, and through it, humans learned lessons that would later shape their success as hunters. They learned to read landscapes, to anticipate the behaviour of animals, to work together under pressure, to use tools effectively, and to plan ahead. These skills did not appear suddenly when humans began hunting large prey. They were developed gradually, refined through countless small experiences, many of them centred around the remains of animals killed by others. In a sense, scavenging was a kind of apprenticeship, a long period of learning in which humans studied the lives and deaths of the creatures around them. They observed how predators stalked, how prey moved, how herds reacted to danger. They learned where animals travelled, where they rested, where they drank. Knowledge gathered in this way became the foundation of hunting. There was no single day when humans suddenly stopped being prey and became hunters. No moment when the balance of nature clearly tipped. No turning of a page where the story changed all at once. Instead, the shift happened gradually, almost quietly, through countless small changes in behaviour, skill and understanding, changes so slow that the people living through them would never have noticed how important they were. For a long time, scavenging remained a major part of survival. Groups still followed herds, still watched the movements of large predators, still approached carcasses cautiously and worked quickly. But alongside this way of living, something else began to emerge. Humans started to hunt, at first in small and careful ways. The earliest hunts were not dramatic chases of massive animals. They were modest, cautious attempts to capture smaller prey, creatures that could be caught with less risk. Tortoises, birds, rodents, fish in shallow water, animals that could be trapped, cornered, or taken with simple tools. These small successes mattered. Each successful hunt provided not only food, but experience. People learned how animals behaved when startled, how they fled, how they hid, how they used the landscape to escape. Knowledge began to accumulate. Over time, humans became better at predicting movement. They noticed that animals followed certain paths to water, that herds grazed in particular areas at certain times of day, that some species were more alert than others, and that weather and season influenced behaviour. These observations were not written down, but they were remembered, discussed, and passed on. A younger member of the group could learn from someone who had watched the land for decades. And gradually, this knowledge allowed humans to attempt something more ambitious. Instead of waiting for predators to make a kill, groups began to coordinate their movements to drive animals into difficult terrain, toward cliffs, into marshy ground, or into narrow passages where escape was harder. This did not require great speed or strength. It required planning, patience, and cooperation. Imagine a group spreading out quietly across a valley, moving slowly, guiding a small herd in a particular direction without startling them too soon. Another group waits ahead, hidden behind rocks or trees. The animals, sensing disturbance, move away from one group and toward another, gradually funneled into a place where they can be approached more closely. Such hunts were not always successful. Animals are alert and unpredictable. Wind can shift, carrying scent. A sudden noise can send a herd scattering in all directions, but sometimes the plan worked, and when it did, the reward was immense. A successful hunt provided more food than scavenging often could, and more importantly, it provided control. Instead of waiting for opportunity, humans were beginning to create it. Tools played an increasing role in this transformation. Spears, at first simple wooden shafts, gradually became more refined. Points were sharpened, sometimes hardened in fire, sometimes tipped with carefully shaped stone. Throwing a spear effectively requires practice and coordination. It is not a simple movement. But over generations, people learned, watching one another, correcting mistakes, refining technique. A thrown spear allowed a hunter to strike from a safer distance, reducing the risk of injury. Even if the animal did not fall immediately, a wound could slow it, making tracking possible. Tracking itself became one of the most valuable skills a human could possess. Following an injured animal requires patience and extraordinary attention to detail. A drop of blood on dry ground, a bent blade of grass, a disturbed patch of soil, these small signs form a trail that an experienced tracker can follow for hours or even days. This kind of persistence gave humans an advantage few predators possessed. Many predators rely on short bursts of speed. If the prey escapes that initial rush, the hunt often ends. Humans, however, could continue, walking steadily, conserving energy, letting time and exhaustion weaken the animal. Persistence hunting, as it is now called, was one of the most remarkable strategies early humans developed. In hot conditions, animals that rely on panting to cool themselves can overheat if forced to run for long periods. Humans, with their ability to sweat and regulate body temperature efficiently, could continue moving at a steady pace long after other animals had to stop. This method required cooperation, endurance, and careful observation, but it allowed humans to bring down animals much larger than themselves. It was not an easy or comfortable way to hunt. Hours under the sun, long distances over uneven ground, the constant need to remain alert, all of this demanded physical and mental strength. But it worked, and each success reinforced confidence. Confidence is an important factor in survival. A group that believes it can succeed is more willing to attempt difficult tasks, more willing to experiment, more willing to refine its methods. Gradually, humans began to see themselves not only as survivors, but as hunters. This shift in identity may have been as important as any physical change. Hunting also strengthened social bonds. Large animals could not be hunted effectively by individuals alone. Success required coordination, planning, and trust. Roles emerged naturally. Some people tracked, some drove animals, some prepared weapons, some remained ready to assist or defend. After a successful hunt, food was shared, reinforcing cooperation and fairness. Sharing was not merely generosity, it was a practical necessity. A large animal provided more food than one person or family could consume quickly, and sharing ensured that the entire group benefited. These shared meals strengthened relationships and encouraged continued cooperation. Another important change came from the development of better tools. Stone points became more carefully shaped, attached securely to wooden shafts with plant fibres or animal sinew. These composite tools were more effective and more durable. Later, throwing devices such as spear throwers increased the force and range of a spear, allowing hunters to strike from even greater distances. Each improvement reduced risk and increased success. But even as humans became more capable hunters, they did not stop scavenging. The two strategies existed side by side for a long time. If an opportunity arose to take food with little effort, it was taken. Efficiency mattered. What changed was the range of possibilities available to humans. They were no longer dependent solely on the actions of other predators. They could choose to hunt when conditions were favourable. This growing flexibility made humans more resilient. If herds moved away or predators became scarce, hunting strategies could adjust. If hunting proved difficult, gathering and scavenging could fill the gap. Adaptability became one of the defining features of human survival. And yet, this transformation was not without consequences. As humans became more effective hunters, they began to influence the populations of animals around them. In some regions, large animals became less common over time. The reasons for these changes are complex, involving climate shifts as well as human activity, but there is little doubt that human hunting played a role. The relationship between humans and other predators also began to change. Animals that had once viewed humans as occasional prey began to see them as competitors. Predators learned to avoid areas where humans were numerous or active. Some species adapted by becoming more nocturnal, altering their behaviour to reduce encounters. The balance of power was shifting slowly but steadily. Fire continued to play a role in this process. Hunters could use fire to drive animals, to clear vegetation, or to manage landscapes in ways that encouraged the growth of certain plants and attracted grazing animals. This was not farming, not yet, but it was a form of environmental influence, a way of shaping the land to improve the chances of success. Communication also became increasingly important. Hunts required coordination over distance, signals to begin movement, warnings when animals changed direction, calls to regroup. Language, gestures, and shared understanding allowed groups to act with precision that would have been impossible for solitary hunters. And with each generation, children grew up watching these activities, learning not only how to survive, but how to plan, how to cooperate, how to think ahead. The knowledge accumulated slowly, building layer upon layer, until hunting became not an experiment, but a reliable part of life. Still, humans remained vulnerable. Hunts could fail, injuries could occur, predators were still dangerous, and the environment itself remained unpredictable. The shift from prey to hunter was not a sudden reversal, but a gradual rebalancing. There were still nights when the darkness beyond the firelight held watching eyes. Still journeys that ended in retreat rather than success. Still seasons when food was scarce and survival uncertain. But something fundamental had changed. Humans were no longer merely reacting to the world. They were shaping it, influencing it, and learning to bend its patterns to their advantage. What finally began to tip the balance between humans and the great predators of the ancient world was not a single invention or a sudden change in strength. It was a combination of qualities that, taken together, made humans something unusual among animals. We were not the fastest, not the strongest, not the best armed by nature, yet we possessed endurance, the ability to plan, and a growing capacity to think ahead in ways that few other species could match. These traits did not appear overnight. They developed gradually, shaped by thousands of generations living in demanding environments where small advantages could determine survival. Endurance, in particular, became one of the defining characteristics of humans. Many predators rely on short bursts of speed. A lion, for example, can sprint with incredible power, but only for a short distance. Wolves and wild dogs can run longer, but even they must rest after sustained effort. Most animals overheat quickly if forced to maintain a high level of activity, especially in warm conditions. Humans, by contrast, are remarkably well adapted for sustained movement. Our bodies cool themselves through sweating, which allows heat to dissipate efficiently. Our long legs and upright posture make walking and steady jogging relatively energy efficient. The structure of our muscles favours endurance over explosive speed. This meant that humans could follow prey over long distances, not in a fast chase but in a slow, steady pursuit. Persistence hunting, as it is now called, was not dramatic to watch. There was no sudden sprint or violent confrontation at the beginning. Instead, hunters moved at a consistent pace, tracking an animal that had been startled into running. The animal would run far ahead, then slow, thinking the danger had passed. The hunters would continue walking, following tracks, reading signs, and gradually closing the distance again. This cycle could continue for hours. Under the heat of the sun, many animals struggle to regulate body temperature. Panting helps, but it limits how long they can sustain effort. Eventually, exhaustion sets in. The animal slows, stumbles, or stops, no longer able to flee effectively. Only then would the hunters approach closely enough to use spears or other weapons. This method required extraordinary patience and physical resilience. It also required deep knowledge of the land. Tracking an animal across varied terrain demands attention to subtle details, footprints in soft soil, disturbed stones, broken stems, slight changes in the direction of movement. A skilled tracker could reconstruct the path of an animal hours after it had passed. Tracking also required interpreting behaviour. The angle of footprints might indicate a change in speed. The spacing of tracks could reveal whether the animal was running or walking. Droppings could indicate how recently the animal had passed. All of this information formed a kind of silent conversation between hunter and prey, carried out through signs on the ground. Strategy played an equally important role. Hunters did not always rely solely on endurance. They used terrain to their advantage, guiding animals toward areas where movement was difficult, rocky ground, steep slopes, or dense vegetation. Water sources were another key factor. Animals must drink regularly, especially in hot climates. Knowing where herds were likely to go allowed hunters to position themselves effectively. Sometimes groups worked together to drive animals in particular directions. This required coordination and communication, people spreading out, signalling quietly, adjusting positions as the situation changed. These activities demanded intelligence, not in the sense of abstract reasoning or mathematics, but in the practical sense of understanding patterns, predicting behaviour, and making decisions based on incomplete information. Intelligence also helped humans adapt when plans failed, which they often did. An animal might escape, weather might change, or another predator might appear. Successful groups were those that could adjust quickly, changing direction, choosing a new target or abandoning a hunt when conditions became too dangerous. Flexibility, the willingness to change plans rather than stubbornly following a failing strategy, became a valuable trait. Over time, tools improved as well. Spears became more balanced and effective. Stone points were shaped with greater precision, allowing deeper penetration and more reliable wounds. Later, throwing devices increased the speed and force of projectiles, allowing hunters to strike from safer distances. Each improvement increased efficiency and reduced risk. Fire also played a role in hunting strategies. Controlled burning could clear underbrush, making it easier to move through certain areas. In some cases, fire was used to drive animals, guiding them toward waiting hunters or natural barriers. This required careful planning. Fire can be unpredictable, and using it safely demands knowledge of wind, terrain, and vegetation. Yet these techniques show how humans were beginning to shape their environment, not simply react to it. Another important factor in outlasting predators was cooperation on a larger scale. While many animals cooperate in small groups, humans began to coordinate in ways that allowed complex tasks to be carried out over extended periods. A hunt might involve multiple stages: tracking, driving, waiting, and finally confronting the prey. Each stage required different skills and roles. Some individuals became particularly skilled trackers, others excelled at crafting tools, some were strong runners, others observant watchers. The group benefited from this diversity of abilities. Sharing food after a successful hunt reinforced cooperation. Everyone depended on the success of the group, not just individual effort. This social structure created stability and resilience. If one person was injured or ill, others could compensate. Knowledge was shared rather than lost when individuals died. Predators, by contrast, often rely on fewer individuals, and their survival strategies are more narrowly specialized. A lion depends on strength and speed. A crocodile depends on ambush. These strategies are effective but less flexible. Humans, with their ability to learn and adapt, could respond to changing conditions more effectively. Climate changes, for example, altered landscapes repeatedly during the last hundreds of thousands of years. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Forests became grasslands and then forest again. Animal populations shifted. Humans followed these changes, adapting tools, clothing and hunting methods to new environments. This adaptability allowed them to survive in a wider range of habitats than most predators. Cold regions required new strategies, better clothing, shelters, and careful use of fire. Arid regions demanded knowledge of water sources and travel routes. Forested regions required different hunting techniques than open plains. Each environment presented challenges, but humans learned, experimented, and adjusted. Another subtle but powerful advantage was memory. Humans are capable of remembering not only individual experiences but also patterns observed over long periods. The location of seasonal water sources, migration routes of animals, safe paths through difficult terrain, all of this knowledge accumulated in the minds of experienced individuals. When shared through communication, this knowledge became part of the collective memory of the group. Predators also learn, of course, but their learning is often limited to individual experience. Humans could build upon the experiences of others, creating a growing store of information that improved decision-making over generations. This cumulative knowledge is one of the defining features of human intelligence. Endurance, strategy, and intelligence also influenced how predators perceived humans. Animals learn quickly which prey is easy and which is difficult. A species that travels in groups, uses tools, defends itself effectively, and pursues relentlessly becomes a less attractive target. Gradually, many predators began to avoid humans when possible, not out of fear in the emotional sense, but out of practical calculation. The energy and risk involved in attacking humans often outweighed the potential reward. This shift did not happen everywhere at once, and it was never complete. Humans remained vulnerable in many situations. A lone traveller, an injured individual, or a child separated from the group could still be attacked. But overall, encounters began to change in character. Humans were no longer simply prey. They were competitors, sometimes even threats. The effects of this change rippled through ecosystems. As humans became more effective hunters, populations of large animals began to decline in some regions. The reasons for these declines are complex, involving both climate change and human activity, but it is clear that human hunting played a role in altering the balance of species. Predators that depended on large herbivores sometimes found their food sources reduced. Some adapted, others declined. Humans, with their flexible diets and adaptable strategies, were better able to cope with these changes. Another important development was the growing use of clothing and improved shelters, which allowed humans to remain active in environments and seasons that might have limited other predators. Cold nights, or harsh winters that forced some animals into dormancy or migration, did not affect humans in the same way once fire, clothing, and shelter were reliable. This extended period of activity increased opportunities for hunting and gathering. It also allowed humans to occupy regions where few large predators could survive year-round. Over many thousands of years, these advantages accumulated. There was no single moment when humans became dominant, but gradually the balance shifted. Predators still existed, still hunted, still posed dangers, but they no longer held the same overwhelming advantage. Humans had become persistent, coordinated, and intelligent hunters capable of outlasting many of their rivals. Yet this transformation brought new challenges. As humans became more successful, they began to influence the world around them more deeply. Large animals disappeared from some regions. Landscapes changed under the combined effects of climate and human activity. Competition between human groups sometimes increased as populations grew. The story of humans outlasting predators is not only a story of survival, it is also the beginning of a new relationship with the natural world, one in which humans were no longer simply participants in ecosystems, but increasingly powerful agents of change. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the world began to change in a way no predator could fully anticipate. For thousands upon thousands of years, humans had lived as one vulnerable species among many, adapting, learning, surviving through cooperation and persistence. But there came a period when those advantages, endurance, planning, communication, and shared knowledge began to accumulate to such a degree that the balance between humans and other predators no longer held steady. It did not happen everywhere at once. It did not happen in a single century or even a single millennium. Yet across different regions of the world, the same pattern began to appear. Humans were no longer merely surviving among predators, they were beginning to outcompete them. One of the clearest signs of this shift was the growing effectiveness of human hunting. Earlier hunts had often been cautious, opportunistic, and limited to smaller animals or carefully planned persistence hunts. But as tools improved and cooperation became more refined, humans began to hunt larger and more dangerous prey with increasing confidence. Large herbivores such as mammoths, giant bison, wild horses, and enormous deer species became targets. These animals were powerful, often dangerous, and far larger than any single human. Bringing one down required planning, communication, and coordination, on a scale that few other predators could match. Groups learned to use terrain to their advantage. Cliffs, ravines, marshes, and narrow valleys could be turned into traps. Herds were sometimes driven towards steep drops or into confined spaces where movement was restricted. Spears were used not only at close range but thrown from safer distances, and over time, weapons became more specialized and more reliable. Such hunts were difficult and dangerous, and they did not always succeed. Yet when they did, the reward was enormous. A single large animal could feed an entire group for days, sometimes longer if meat was dried or smoked. This abundance changed human life in subtle ways. With more reliable access to high-energy food, populations could grow slowly. Children had a better chance of surviving. Groups could remain in favourable areas longer instead of moving constantly in search of small, scattered food sources. And with population growth came another quiet but powerful change. There were simply more humans. Predators are sensitive to numbers. A single human may be vulnerable, but a large group presents a very different challenge. As human populations increased in certain regions, encounters between predators and humans began to change in character. Predators that had once hunted humans occasionally began to avoid them more consistently. The risk of injury or retaliation became too high, especially when humans were armed with spears and coordinated in their defense. This avoidance did not mean predators disappeared immediately. Lions, wolves, and other carnivores still hunted their usual prey. But gradually humans occupied more space, travelled more frequently, and became a more dominant presence in the landscape. Competition for food also played a role in this shift. When humans hunted large herbivores, they reduced the prey available to other predators. A lion pride or a pack of wolves depends on a steady supply of grazing animals. If those populations decline or are disturbed, predators must travel farther, expend more energy, and sometimes face starvation. In some regions, large predators began to decline, not necessarily because humans hunted them directly, but because the ecosystems that supported them were changing. Humans were becoming a new kind of ecological force. Fire contributed to this transformation in ways that are sometimes overlooked. By deliberately setting small, controlled fires, humans could clear vegetation, encourage the growth of fresh plants, and attract grazing animals to newly sprouted grass. This practice, used by many traditional societies even in recent history, effectively reshaped landscapes over time. Grasslands expanded in some areas, forest edges shifted, animal migration patterns adjusted. These changes did not happen overnight, but over generations they altered the distribution of both prey and predators. Humans were no longer passive inhabitants of their environments, they were active participants in shaping them. Another factor in the tipping of the balance was the development of increasingly sophisticated social structures. Groups became better organised, better able to share knowledge, and better able to coordinate large-scale activities such as communal hunts or seasonal movements. Leadership, in the sense of individuals guiding decisions or organising efforts, likely emerged gradually. Experience became valuable not only for personal survival, but for guiding others. Elders who remembered migration routes, water sources, or dangerous territories could help entire groups avoid risk. Memory, shared across generations, became one of humanity's most powerful tools. Predators, by contrast, rely largely on instinct and individual learning. A lion learns from its pride, a wolf from its pack, but the accumulation of knowledge across many generations is limited. Humans, with language and teaching, could build upon the experiences of those who came before in ways no other species could match. This cumulative culture allowed improvements in tools, hunting methods, and survival strategies to spread rapidly relative to evolutionary time. And with each improvement, the balance shifted a little further. There is another aspect of this transformation that is less obvious but equally important. Humans became increasingly adaptable. Most predators are specialised. A cheetah depends on speed and open terrain. A polar bear depends on ice and seals. A crocodile depends on water and ambush. When environments change, specialised predators often struggle to adapt quickly. Humans, however, could survive in a wide range of environments. They developed clothing for cold climates, shelters for harsh weather, and tools suited to different landscapes. They could hunt, gather, scavenge, fish, and eventually farm. This flexibility allowed humans to expand into regions where few other large predators could survive year-round. As humans spread, they carried their skills and knowledge with them, gradually occupying more and more of the planet. It is important to understand that this process was not a deliberate conquest. Early humans were not trying to dominate the world in the way we sometimes imagine today. They were simply surviving, making decisions that improved their chances of living through another season. Yet the cumulative effect of those decisions was enormous. In many parts of the world, large animals that had once been common began to disappear. The causes of these extinctions are still debated by scientists, with climate change and human hunting both playing roles. But there is little doubt that human activity contributed significantly in some regions. As large herbivores declined, the predators that depended on them often declined as well. The web of life was changing, and humans were increasingly at the centre of those changes. Another important factor in the tipping of the balance was psychological rather than physical. Humans began to see themselves differently. For countless generations, humans had lived with the constant awareness that they could be hunted. Fear of predators shaped daily behaviour, movement, and sleep. But as hunting successes increased and encounters with predators became less frequent or less dangerous, that constant fear began to ease. Confidence grew. Confidence in turn encouraged further innovation and exploration. Groups ventured into new territories, experimented with new tools, and took risks that earlier generations might have avoided. This did not mean fear disappeared. Fear remained a useful and necessary emotion. but it was no longer the defining condition of human life. Instead of being primarily prey, humans were becoming primarily hunters. Predators still existed, and in some regions they remained powerful and dangerous. But humans had crossed an important threshold. They had become the most versatile and persistent hunters in their ecosystems, and versatility is a powerful advantage. A lion cannot switch easily from hunting antelope to fishing or gathering roots. A wolf cannot build shelter or store food for long periods. Humans could do all of these things and more. This versatility made human survival less dependent on any single resource and less vulnerable to sudden changes. Over long periods of time, this advantage proved decisive. There is also something else that set humans apart, something less tangible but deeply influential. Humans could imagine the future. They could plan not only for tomorrow but for seasons ahead. They could prepare tools in advance, store food, and teach children skills they would need years later. This capacity for long-term thinking allowed humans to act in ways that reshaped their environments over decades and centuries, something few other species can do. And as this capacity grew, the role of humans in the natural world changed fundamentally. They were no longer just another species responding to the forces around them. They were becoming a force in their own right. Yet even as the balance tipped, echoes of the earlier world remained. Night was still dark. Fires still needed tending. Predators still roamed in many regions, and accidents or encounters could still be deadly. The transformation was not absolute, and it was not uniform across all landscapes. In some places, humans remained vulnerable far longer than in others. But the overall direction was clear. Humans had become the most dangerous animal, not because of claws or fangs, but because of cooperation, intelligence, and the ability to adapt continuously. Even now, in a world filled with electric lights, locked doors, and cities that glow through the night, many people still feel a small, quiet unease when the lights go out. It does not always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it is only a faint tension, a subtle awareness of the darkness beyond the edges of sight. Other times it's more noticeable, a quickened heartbeat when an unexpected sound breaks the silence, or the instinctive urge to turn on a light before walking into an unlit room. This reaction is so common that it often goes unnoticed or is dismissed as imagination. Yet it is not imagination at all. It is memory, not the kind we consciously recall, but the kind written into the nervous system over thousands of generations. For most of human history, darkness was not simply the absence of daylight. It was a time when danger increased. Predators moved more confidently at night. Visibility was limited. Sounds were harder to interpret. A human without fire or shelter was at a severe disadvantage in the dark. Survival often depended on remaining alert, listening carefully, and staying close to others. Those who were attentive, who reacted quickly to unfamiliar sounds or movements, were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. For many generations, this sensitivity to darkness became part of human nature. It is important to understand that fear of the dark is not really fear of darkness itself. Darkness is simply a condition. What the mind responds to is uncertainty. In darkness, the brain has less information to work with. Vision, our dominant sense, becomes unreliable. Shapes blur. Distances become harder to judge. The mind fills in the gaps, sometimes imagining threats where none exist. This tendency is not a flaw. It is a protective mechanism. If the mind occasionally assumes danger when there is none, the cost is small, a moment of unease, perhaps a restless night. But if the mind fails to recognize danger when it is real, the cost in an ancient environment could be fatal. Evolution tends to favor caution when the stakes are high. This is why sudden noises can startle us so strongly. The startle reflex is rapid, occurring before the conscious mind has time to interpret the sound. Muscles tense, the heart rate increases, attention sharpens. Only afterward does the brain evaluate the situation and decide whether the reaction was necessary. This reflex is ancient. It developed in a world where reacting quickly to unexpected sounds could mean the difference between escaping and being caught. Even today, a dropped object or a loud bang can trigger the same response despite the absence of real danger. Another common experience that reflects our evolutionary past is the feeling of being watched in dark or unfamiliar environments. People walking alone at night sometimes feel a sense of presence, even when no one is there. This sensation arises because the human brain is highly sensitive to subtle cues, movements in peripheral vision, faint sounds, changes in light. In uncertain conditions, the brain sometimes interprets ambiguous signals as potential threats. Again, this tendency favours survival. It is better to assume that a shadow might conceal danger than to ignore it completely. Sleep patterns also reflect ancient pressures. Humans do not typically fall instantly into deep sleep. Sleep occurs in cycles, with lighter stages in which the brain remains responsive to sound and movement. This pattern likely evolved in part to allow individuals to wake quickly if danger approached during the night. Many people still find it easier to sleep in familiar environments than in unfamiliar ones. A new room, new sounds, or different lighting conditions can make sleep more difficult, even when there is no real threat. The brain, sensing unfamiliarity, remains slightly more alert. There is also the comfort many people feel when sleeping near others. Families share homes. Children often feel safer with a parent nearby. Even adults may find it easier to rest when another person is in the room. This preference has deep roots. For early humans, sleeping in groups provided real protection. More ears to hear danger, more eyes to watch, more people to respond if something approached. The presence of others reduced risk and allowed deeper rest. Light itself has a powerful psychological effect. A small lamp or candle can make a dark space feel safer, even when it does not significantly increase visibility. The mind associates light with safety because, for countless generations, firelight marked the boundary between relative security and the unknown. This association persists even in modern environments. It is also interesting to consider how children often display stronger fears of darkness than adults. Part of this is due to imagination, but part may also reflect a more direct connection to instinctive responses. As people grow older, experience and reasoning help moderate these fears, but they rarely disappear entirely. Even adults may feel uneasy in complete darkness, especially in unfamiliar surroundings. Another echo of the prey mind appears in the way humans respond to certain sounds. Footsteps behind us, rustling in leaves, the snap of a twig. These sounds attract attention immediately. They are the kinds of sounds that once signaled the approach of predators or other dangers. Our hearing is particularly sensitive to sudden changes in sound patterns, and our brains are quick to interpret those changes as important. This sensitivity can be observed in how easily people wake when hearing their name spoken, or when hearing an unusual noise at night, even if they sleep through constant background sounds like traffic or wind. The brain filters familiar noises but remains alert to the unfamiliar. Fear is not the only legacy of our time as prey. There are also positive traits that developed alongside it. Awareness of surroundings, the ability to read subtle cues, sensitivity to the moods and expressions of others, all of these skills helped early humans survive and cooperate. Empathy, for example, may have been strengthened by the need to understand and respond to the emotional states of others in dangerous situations. Recognizing fear or tension in a companion could signal danger before any external sign was visible. This sensitivity to others remains one of the defining characteristics of human social life. There is also the human tendency to gather in sheltered, enclosed spaces, especially at night. People often prefer rooms with walls rather than open areas, chairs positioned against walls rather than in the center of large spaces. These preferences reflect ancient instincts to seek protection and maintain visibility of potential threats. Even architecture sometimes reflects these instincts. Windows, doors, and lighting are arranged in ways that provide both shelter and visibility. balancing the desire for security with the need to observe the surroundings. Another interesting example is the way people respond to stories and films that play on fears of darkness or unseen threats. These themes resonate deeply, not because they are new, but because they tap into ancient experiences. The idea of something lurking just beyond sight is powerful precisely because it was once real. Yet it is important to remember that fear of the dark is not purely negative. It is part of a broader system that helps humans remain cautious, attentive, and aware. Without this system, our ancestors would not have survived. Modern life has reduced many of the dangers that shape these instincts, but the instincts themselves remain. They are part of the human inheritance, carried forward even as environments change. And there is something quietly reassuring about this continuity. The same mind that once listened for predators in the darkness now listens for the hum of a refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, or the quiet breathing of someone nearby. The context has changed, but the underlying patterns remain. We are in many ways the same creatures who once gathered around fires, watching the edges of the light, listening to the night. Understanding this connection to the past can change how we think about fear. Instead of seeing it as weakness, we can see it as memory, a reminder of the long journey that brought us here. A journey through landscapes where survival required attention, cooperation, and resilience. And as that journey continued, humans not only carried the echoes of the prey mind with them, but also developed new ways of thinking about their place in the world, new relationships with the animals around them, and new questions about what it meant to be a species that had once been hunted and had now become the dominant presence across much of the planet. A transformation that invites reflection on how far we have come and what that long history still means for us today. If you step outside at night and pause for a moment, something interesting happens when you stop moving and simply listen. At first, you may notice very little, perhaps the faint hum of distant traffic, the rustle of wind, or the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. But after a short while, more sounds begin to appear. Subtle ones, a distant footstep, a creaking branch, the shifting air itself. The mind, given time, begins to notice more than it first expected. This quiet sharpening of awareness is not new. It is ancient. For tens of thousands of years, nights like this were not moments of casual reflection, but part of daily survival. Darkness carried meaning, sound carried information, stillness carried weight. Our ancestors learned to listen not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. And although the world around us has changed dramatically, that long history has not vanished. It remains quietly, in the background of our thoughts, in small instincts and reactions that most of us never question. The story we have been exploring, the long era when humans were still prey, is not simply a story about danger or survival. It is a story about transformation, about how a vulnerable species gradually learned to observe, to cooperate, to communicate, and eventually to shape the world around it. But it is also a story about memory, not the kind of memory that can be written down or recorded in photographs, but the kind carried in habits, in reflexes, in the subtle ways we respond to our surroundings. Consider how naturally people seek light when entering a dark space. Even when there is no real threat, the hand reaches almost automatically for a switch or a lamp. The presence of light brings a sense of ease that is difficult to explain logically, yet feels completely natural. That comfort has deep roots. For countless generations, firelight meant safety. It meant warmth, protection, companionship. It meant that the edges of the world were visible, that the darkness had been pushed back just enough to allow rest. It is no surprise that light still carries that emotional weight. Another quiet echo of the past appears in the way we respond to sudden sounds. A loud noise can make the heart race before the mind has time to interpret it. Muscles tense. Attention sharpens instantly. This reaction is older than language, older than tools, older even than the earlier shelters. It is part of a system designed to keep us alive in a world where hesitation could be fatal. Yet these instincts do not only remind us of danger, they also remind us of resilience. Humans did not survive the ancient world by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by learning, by adapting, by working together. We survived because we could share knowledge, because we could plan, because we could care for one another. These qualities, cooperation, communication, empathy, are still at the heart of human life today. When people gather with friends or family, when they share meals, when they tell stories, they are continuing patterns that began long before cities or written language. Sitting together, talking, listening, these simple acts were once part of survival, strengthening bonds, passing on knowledge, easing fear. Even laughter, light and ordinary as it seems, may have played a role in maintaining group cohesion, reducing stress and reinforcing trust. The ancient world was dangerous, but it was also deeply social, and perhaps that is one of the most important lessons to remember. It is easy to imagine the past as a time defined only by hardship, but our ancestors were not merely struggling to survive every moment. They experienced curiosity, companionship, and quiet moments of rest. They watched the sky, listened to the wind, cared for their children, and found meaning in their lives just as we do now. The difference was not in their humanity, but in their environment. The world they inhabited demanded constant awareness, and that awareness shaped the human mind in ways that still influence us today. There is something humbling in realizing how recently, in the long timeline of life on Earth, humans were not dominant at all. For most of our history, we were just another species trying to endure in a landscape filled with powerful predators and unpredictable conditions. The sense of control that defines modern life is in many ways a very recent development, and remembering that can change how we see ourselves. It can remind us that the systems and technologies we rely on are not the whole of who we are. Beneath them lies a much older nature shaped by forests, plains, rivers, and firelit nights. That older nature is not something to fear or reject. It is something to understand, because understanding where we came from helps us understand why we think and feel the way we do, why certain environments calm us, why others make us uneasy, why companionship feels reassuring, and why the dark still carries a faint sense of mystery. There is also a broader perspective to consider. Humans eventually became the most influential species on the planet, capable of reshaping ecosystems, altering climates, and spreading to nearly every environment on Earth. This transformation brought comfort and security for many, but it also created new responsibilities. A species that can change the world must also consider how it changes the world. The animals that once hunted our ancestors now live mostly at the edges of human society in remote regions or protected areas. Many species that once shared the land with humans are gone, lost to extinction through a combination of climate change, habitat loss, and human activity. This does not diminish the extraordinary achievement of human survival, but it does invite reflection. The long journey from prey to dominant species was not only a triumph of intelligence and cooperation, it was also the beginning of a new relationship with the natural world, one that continues to evolve. And perhaps remembering the time when humans were vulnerable can help us approach that relationship with greater humility. It is difficult to feel completely separate from nature when you remember that, not so long ago, we depended on it so directly that the sound of wind in the grass or the movement of shadows could determine whether a person lived or died. That awareness fosters a kind of respect, not fear in the sense of panic, but respect for the complexity and power of the natural world, and for the delicate balance that sustains life. If you think about it, every person alive today is the descendant of individuals who survived those dangerous times. Every generation faced challenges, made decisions, adapted to changing conditions, and carried knowledge forward. The continuity of that survival is remarkable. It means that the instincts and abilities that once helped our ancestors endure still exist within us, even if they are rarely needed in the same way. And perhaps there is comfort in that thought. It means that beneath the surface of modern life lies a deep well of resilience, a capacity to adapt and endure that has been tested over thousands of generations. So as you settle into the quiet of the present moment, wherever you are in a comfortable room, perhaps listening with the lights low or already lying down, it may be worth taking a slow breath and remembering that long history, not as something distant and disconnected, but as something that still lives within us in subtle ways. The human story did not begin with cities or machines or written words. It began with small groups gathered in the darkness, watching, listening, learning, and slowly discovering how to survive in a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. And even now, in a safer and more comfortable world, the echoes of those nights remain, quiet but persistent, reminders of how far we have come and of the long journey that shaped the species we are today, a journey that continues in ways both obvious and subtle. As the Earth keeps turning, the stars continue their slow movement across the sky, and the story of humanity moves forward, one generation at a time, carrying with it the memory of the age when we were still hunted, and the quiet understanding that survival, cooperation, and awareness are threads that still connect us to that distant past.